Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Our council meeting is going to resume now with a territorial acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, land on which we are broadcasting from today, is the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. And a moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. So I will start by looking to council to see if there is any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Council, we have a couple of minutes before us. Looking to council, somebody to move those minutes. Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And there are 3 items on the consent motion. Looking to council to see if anybody would like to pull anything from the consent motion. Seeing nobody, would anyone like to move the consent motion items? Moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you to staff for putting those together. And we are on to the main event. Before we begin, the formal public meeting for zoning bylaw amendment application Z2309, Canadian Tire Properties, Inc., 650, 654, 656, 660 Herb Street West, Ward 2 Northwest, which was originally scheduled to occur on Monday, October 2nd, 2023, has been deferred to October 30th, 2023. Anyone looking for more information regarding the application, please contact the planner, John Voss, at john.voss@waterloo.ca or 519-747-8527. Pardon me while I get prepared here. Pride myself on being prepared, but apparently I'm not. One moment. Page 2 of 3, I didn't make it that far. My apologies. This is a formal public meeting to consider item 9A, official plan amendment number 39, zoning bylaw amendment Z2211 203-207 King Street South and 10 to 16 John Street West, 2865161 Ontario, Inc. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there is more than one binder, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on September 7, 2023. It was mailed or emailed on September 14th, 2023 to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed or spoke at the informal public meeting held on Monday, October 3, 2022, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. The planner, Max Kerrigan, will now give a brief overview of the application. Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Councillor Barley. Good evening, Mayor McCabe, members of council, city staff, and members of the public. Thank you for coming out this evening. This, as you mentioned, Councillor Barley, tonight's formal public meeting is for official plan amendment number 39 and zoning bylaw amendment Z2211 for lands located at 203 to 207 King Street South and 10 to 16 John Street West. This application was submitted by a numbered company represented here tonight by Trevor Hawkins of MHBC Planning and Aidan Sweeney of Sweeney & Co. Architects, who will be co-presenting, or I don't believe co-presenting, potentially. I believe Trevor will be presenting on behalf of the applicant. So to begin tonight's presentation, I want to zoom way out from the subject property and look at an excerpt from our city's official plan. This map here shows the city's adopted planned growth strategy or city structure, Schedule B. Generally speaking, the city's strategy is to direct growth towards nodes and corridors, i.e. major roads and intersections that are spread across the city. These areas planned for the highest density are those shown in the deeper purple and darker orange, and in the light yellow at the bottom of the plan, which is the city's Uptown Waterloo Urban Growth Center, which is also considered the city's primary node and primary focus for high-density intensification within our urban boundary. Zooming in a little bit closer, you can see the yellow Uptown Waterloo Urban Growth Center at the bottom, as well as the majority of the city's major nodes, as identified on the previous slide, indicated in purple. Waterloo has no land left on its edges, and therefore must grow through intensification within established neighborhoods. Additionally, and important to highlight, is that the ION links several of these major nodes, as you can see on the little white symbols. These high-density nodes are located, these ION stations are located on the high-density nodes, and that's no coincidence. Waterloo's planning framework is based on capitalizing on this significant transit investment, reducing new residents' reliance on the automobile by locating high-density residential in close proximity to services, schools, retail, and amenities, with the ultimate goal of curbing climate change. Zooming in even further, this aerial shows that the subject property is situated within the city's primary node, where, I repeat, is where a significant portion of the city's population and employment growth has been directed as per our adopted planning documents since 2005. The resultant tower neighborhood that we see here between Park Street and King is a direct result of this planning framework, which again has been in effect for nearly 20 years. The subject lands consist of a consolidation of property situated between the Sun Life campus to the southeast and the Bauer complex, and fronts on 3 streets: King Street South, John Street West, and Caroline Street South. The site's also situated adjacent to the Iron Horse Trail, as well as the Allen Street ION station. Now, it's very important to understand that in order to intensify in a way that's sensitive to established neighborhoods, the city has specific built form regulations in their zoning bylaw, in our zoning bylaw rather, that are designed to address matters related to sky views, sun access, wind mitigation, built form transition, and pedestrian scale design at grade. This diagram on the screen shows the built form that results from these built form regulations, which is a tower protruding from a podium base. This built form allows for reduced wind downdraft because of the podium, which mitigates windy conditions, a narrower tower, thus allowing for more favorable sun access than a traditional slab design, and a podium size that results in a comfortable pedestrian environment and scale. This diagram demonstrates a building that is currently permitted on this property we are discussing this evening. That said, and as we all know, properties vary in shape and sizes, and therefore, established process to assess applications that consider variations to these regulations set out in the zoning bylaw, i.e. a zoning bylaw amendment application, which is a common planning process. The development in front of us today is a 24-story tower upon a 6-story podium, equating to 30 stories. The proposed height and density exceeds the permitted maximums and consists of single, double, and a handful of bachelor units. The proposal consists of retail at grade, including a daycare proposed at the corner of Caroline and John Streets. The proposal complies with all parking regulations, and as a result of a narrow and irregularly shaped lot fabric, several site-specific built form-related provisions have been requested, which relate to step-backs, setbacks, and horizontal tower width. The original submission submitted in September 2022 consisted of a 26-story building. Staff had concerns with the number and degree of site-specific requests related to built form, as well as lack of unit variation and a parking count that exceeded the regulations of the bylaw. The applicant revised their proposal, which is the building on the right, to meet parking requirements, introduce a greater unit mix which more than doubled the number of 2-bedroom units, as well as provided a more slender built form, thus reducing the magnitude of the site-specific requests, which was generally in keeping with the intent of the zoning bylaws built form regulations. To help visualize the degree of variation from the permitted form and the proposal in front of us. Here we can see the difference between an as-of-right built form on the left, which is permitted today and could go directly to site plan, versus the applicant's first submission in the middle, and the subsequent changes demonstrated in the submission being contemplated today, shown on the right. So the specific requests are listed here. I'm not going to read through them all, as these requests are clearly outlined in my staff report. I am available to answer specific questions related to these if needed, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on a number which have come up a fair amount in the past few months through letters and concerns. Here I'm demonstrating the request for reduced separation distance along the northerly lot line. In my opinion, this request to vary the minimum tower separation distance is acceptable. Now, the proposed tower separation to the northerly lot line varies as a result of the staggered property boundary. It ranges from 16.8 meters to 14.8 to 7 meters and finally 5 meters for approximately 23 of its 45-meter length. The zoning bylaw requirement of 11 meters is satisfied for approximately 50% of the interface with the Bauer property. Now, more importantly, the 11-meter setback requirement is designed to ensure that there's 22 meters between two adjacent towers. In this particular instance, the Bauer Loft tower is already in excess of 22 meters from the shared property line, and therefore the resultant tower separation exceeds the zoning bylaw requirement at approximately 34 meters between towers. As a result, the tower separation distance is more substantial than would be permitted as of right by 12 additional meters between the towers. With respect to the setback at grade on Caroline and John Streets, this is as a result of a narrow, irregular site. Now, the intent of the 5-meter setback at grade is to accommodate a wide public realm for plantings, furnishings, and pedestrian spaces. The proposed public realm is in keeping with the local context and in fact exceeds the other streets in the neighborhood as it provides over 6 meters of public realm space between the back of curb and building face on all flanking streets. In comparison, the proposed pedestrian space exceeds portions of King Street in the Uptown, as well as most sidewalks within the Allen Street station area, as you can see in these images. Trees, furnishing, and superior public realm will be secured through the site plan process. Now, with respect to added height and density, staff are supportive of additional building height and density at this location. Areas immediately adjacent to high-order transit stations represent strategic opportunities to consider higher heights and densities for several reasons. These include encouraging more residents to use public transit, reducing car dependency, promoting climate-conscious transportation options, land use efficiency and optimization are required under the provincial policy statement and echoed in the city's official plan. Higher density development near transit stations optimizes lands, making the most of transit-supportive real estate. Encouraging higher density developments contributes to vibrant neighborhoods, and this can foster a sense of community, attract businesses, and lead to livable, lively, walkable areas where residents can live, work, and shop conveniently, as can be seen by the success of this neighborhood as it is today. Housing affordability is a concern, and higher density development near transit hubs provides more housing and an option for living without an automobile. Through staff's review, it's determined that the proposal is compatible with the planned scale and character of the surrounding neighborhood and will have minimal impacts on neighboring land uses. The proposed density is being provided in a form that meets the intent of the built form regulations in the zoning bylaw and the urban design manual. Staff are of the opinion that the proposed modifications to the zoning bylaw reasonably balances the planned function of the lands, as in high-rise and high-density, applicable planning policies, site constraints, and the surrounding context. An enhanced streetscape is proposed that is comfortable, pedestrian-scaled, and activated to create desirable public realm, and staff are supportive of higher densities and heights in this transit-supportive location. Staff's recommendations to council tonight are as follows. That staff report IPPW 2023-46 be approved, that OPA 39 be adopted, that council request regional approval of OPA 39, and that council approve ZBA said 2211 with site-specific regulations, including the application of a holding symbol, which cannot be removed until detailed development plans are provided that demonstrate a high standard of urban design and architecture for this landmark site, and that the owner provides a noise study as required by the region. Lastly, further to the above, staff request that council direct staff to confirm the following urban design matters through site plan control. High-quality architecture and design at this very important location, high-quality public realm, as well as temporary parking on John Street to be evaluated, including options to better accommodate deliveries, drop-offs, and the like. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that, Max. Thorough as always, and appreciate the high-level overview as well. I'm looking to council to see if there are any questions, starting with Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Bodley. Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Kerrigan. Can I trouble you to, I have a couple of questions. So one is with regard to the childcare space. The legislation would require an outdoor play space for that childcare space. Has the applicant identified how they would accommodate that?
Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Freeman, yes, we're working through, they have provided a space adjacent to the daycare on Caroline Street, partially covered, I believe, and adjacent to the public right-of-way. Details of that space will be secured through site plan.
I might ask more questions of the applicant when they're there about that. My other question is, can I trouble you to go back to your figure where it's the right of zoning figure, where you show right of zoning, the first application in October and then today's application? So, sorry, it's the next one, this one. So essentially, the tower separations and some of the pieces but permitted as right would actually be closer to the existing high-density residential than what there is being proposed in this second application. Am I reading this figure right?
Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Freeman, I think I understand your question.
Okay.
The diagram second submission is more in line with the as-of-right permission, so more in line with the zoning bylaw.
Okay,
Yeah.
because the tower's coming in, is that correct?
For a number of reasons. Setbacks did vary between applications. The tower, the middle building is more of a slab design, which means it's wider. Now in all these, if we were looking the opposite angle, the tower is about 20 meters wide and it's 45 meters the other direction. So what we're looking at here is the 45 meters. So it went down from 56, I believe, to 45 between the two submissions. 40 meters is the permitted horizontal width.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that was my questions for now.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Any other questions from council for Max? Councillor Wright.
Hi, thank you. Through you, Chair Bodley. I'm just wondering if you can give us a sense of where the other buildings in this major corridor have exceeded the zoning height. You know, like we've got 30 stories proposed here. Where else are we seeing that in Uptown Waterloo? Thanks.
Through Chair Bodley to Councillor Wright. This, I believe, is the first within this part of the city. There are certainly other applications the city is beginning to see. It's becoming more commonplace, particularly along the ION in major transit station areas. So yeah, I believe this is the first of this height, of this magnitude in this part of the city.
Any follow-up there, Councillor Wright, or, okay. Chair Freeman?
I'm not the chair, but I
Councillor
appreciate the elevation and title for this evening. So I did read the transportation plan, and I wanted to, like much to Professor Shortreed's chagrin, I did not become a transportation engineer. I wanted to make sure that I understood what I was reading correctly, that all of the background traffic is in here now. It accounts for the peak daily traffic associated with people coming and going from the Sun Life place of business. It includes all the developments across the street at John Street, everything that's existing right now on Allen. Am I reading that correctly?
Through Chair Bodley to Councillor Freeman, that is correct. There were a number of comments back from various members of the public with respect to the transportation impact study. I went back to transportation staff and asked whether these different aspects that were noted as potentially not being included, whether or not they were included. The daycare was not included in the revised TIS, however, was revised prior to my recommendation. It was accounted for, as well as the Sun Life towers, which are not yet built, and all existing traffic flow in the neighborhood.
So I see one level of service at an E, and I can't quite figure out what turning direction that is and whether or not the region has recommended some kind of modification to the traffic signal or something to do with that.
Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Freeman, I'm not aware of any recommendation from the region with respect to changing the signals.
Okay.
I was informed that there were no concerns that the existing infrastructure would be able to handle the added vehicular volumes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Mayor McCabe.
Thank you, through you, Chair Bodley. And thank you, Max, for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about wind in the area, because my understanding is with the couple of the existing residential buildings around the Bauer Lofts and an urban good in that there's already some challenges with wind. So I know the report indicated that there could be some trees added and things like that, but just wondering if you could comment on wind through that area and what can be done to mitigate that.
Certainly, through Chair Bodley to Mayor McCabe. As you indicated, the wind study, as part of any application, we will review a wind study provided by a wind consultant. In this case, there were no adverse impacts identified at grade. There were some adverse impacts indicated on the podium level. So there's recommendations with respect to the addition of different downdraft sort of mitigators on the building or different things that could be added to make it a more enjoyable space on the amenity terrace. At grade, there were recommendations with respect to adding street trees because they certainly help deal with windy conditions. Just for everyone's knowledge, they do identify, they have sort of a range, a scale, whether different parts of the site are comfortable for standing versus walking versus more passive sitting uses. And in all the areas proposed for gathering spaces and public realm, they were appropriate for more passive uses in the warmer months. Now, again, just going back to our built form regulations, you know, all these matters related to step backs above the podium and the tower form, these are, again, to mitigate downdraft conditions, so a tower will naturally have wind shoot straight down. In this case, instead of it going right to grade, it will hit the podium and be deflected. So that certainly... No? At grade or on the you're speaking from the podium? Okay. Well, this comes from best practice that is, you know, trained through urban design and architecture. I'd be happy to follow up and walk along the streets and experience this. I can certainly understand that tower neighborhoods are windier than others, but one design mechanism that is sort of a general rule of thumb and best practice is to have a tower on a podium form, because it does, in my understanding and through my experience, help to reduce adverse wind impacts. And the study that was submitted did indicate that the conditions at grade are comfortable for all types of use. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Just switching to the daycare, can you remind me how many spaces would be accommodated in the daycare?
Through Councillor Bodley to Mayor McCabe, I don't know the number off by heart, but there is a requirement through the zoning bylaw with respect to visitor spaces for that use, and they have been accommodated on site.
Okay. And I guess my last question with this is, like, there's the mix of the 1 and 2 bedroom units. Are these the right types of units that we need for Waterloo, like the 1 and 2 bedroom?
Through Councillor Bodley to Mayor
Sorry,
McCabe.
excuse me, Max, sorry. I'm just going to ask that we could have a little bit of decorum here. There's no clapping in the chambers. If we could, we have a lot of people here today. I know there's a lot of attention on this matter, but if we could just have a bit of decorum on that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So through Councillor Bodley to Mayor McCabe, I can't speak directly to what the best housing form is, what unit mix is the most appropriate. I can certainly understand that we are in a situation really across the board, not just in Waterloo, where housing affordability, what people can buy in terms of family units is slim. It's virtually impossible in many municipalities. So whether that's in 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom, I don't know the answer. I do know that the city's actively working through, a housing strategy that was adopted. Part of that is inclusionary zoning, which will include requirements for a unit mix that is appropriate and needed. As I indicated through the first submission, this proposal was primarily 1-bedroom units, which we didn't like. We didn't necessarily have a mechanism to force the applicant to provide, X percentage of family units, but we encouraged them to provide something that was more in line with the needs locally. Again, I don't monitor the market. I don't know what they can market and what they can sell, but they've obviously provided, I'm assuming they've provided a mix that they're going to be able to sell. Otherwise, I'm not sure why they would be putting that mix in the market. But they did increase the number of 2-bedroom units, which is more in line with what we're looking for, so that was a good thing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Councillor Wright?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Bodley. I'm just wondering if you can clarify a couple of things. So I have a three-parter here. One is about the trees themselves that are included in the landscape plan. Do they become street trees over the course of this project? And I'll just add the other 2 questions, and then maybe you can speak to all 3 of them. Number 2 is in this pocket of the neighborhood, there are really limited organic zones, I'll put it that way. Even the development across the street has AstroTurf at its podium level, at the ground level, and so it's actually not an organic landscape through quite a great stretch of it. The beds are organic, but the green material is not. And I'm just wondering how that's taken into consideration and how the city works with developers to create those conditions for the landscaping for some sort of biological material. And then the third question had to do with whether the building itself is intended to be a condo or purpose-built rental. Thanks.
Thank you. Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Wright. With respect to condo or purpose-built rental, I'm actually not sure of the plans. The applicant may be able to answer that question. With respect to conditions at grade and yes, the lack of green spaces, this neighborhood obviously is an intensifying area. We do, through the zoning provisions, promote more space for not necessarily green, but more space for sort of public realm space at grade. Now, in areas where there's increased pedestrian traffic, there's lots of evidence to suggest that grass isn't necessarily the best thing to have at grade around transit stations where there are more people. Now, gathering spaces, public realm, and certainly trees are great to have. And frankly, there aren't enough street trees in Waterloo, so as part of the site plan process, we will secure an enhanced public realm in this space. for the neighborhood, for the residents, and hopefully set a precedent for other neighborhoods of this type.
So just to reiterate, the trees that are planned as part of this project then do become street trees as part of the public realm? They're not maintained by the development thereafter, or part of the development's green amenities?
Yes, and further to when I walked through, I provided a couple diagrams showing the extent of that public realm. Now, the 1.7 reduction is on the private property. There is quite a wide public realm at grade already, which provides ample space for street trees. Street trees and paving space, hardscape space, and certainly you could accommodate some space, soft space there, so like grass, but as I mentioned, it may not be the most suitable use, but these are aspects that we can certainly discuss. And as I previously mentioned, we're gonna put I'm recommending to put a holding provision on the site so these matters can be sorted through site plan and meet the standard that we expect for this important location.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Thanks.
Councillor Rowe?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Max. I just wanted to build a little bit on what Councillor Wright was saying, just a little bit more about green space. So in addition to the amenities on site and the trees, et cetera, what do you see the residents of that building using in the city of Waterloo for green space?
Sure, thank you. Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Rowe. We do have a requirement for amenity space within the development itself. So all the units do have, proposed to have terraces. The developers also propose to have the amenity terrace on the 7th story, so that will take form through site plan and can include a combination of, softscapes, hardscapes, whatever they desire. Now, with respect to green spaces within close proximity, they're immediately adjacent to the ion station, so they are within a 6-minute ride to Waterloo Park, or an 11-minute walk, 20-minute walk to Waterloo Park, or Alexandra Park is a 5-10 minute walk away, which is a brand new park. Mary Allen Park is 10 minutes, and the Iron Horse Trail is obviously another important recreation corridor that links a number of these important green spaces.
Thank you. I have one more question, if I may. I just wanted to see if you could touch on the shadow study. And if I'm reading it correctly, there are 2-hour intervals of impacts in the spring and the fall between 9 and 2 p.m., if I have that correctly. So I'm just wondering, I'm probably not phrasing this very well, but is it, in your opinion then, that the shadow will be a minimal impact on the adjacent property?
Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Rowe, we do have set criteria in our urban design manual with respect to shadow impacts. We review any submission with these in mind. They aren't sort of the hard stop that we necessarily follow, as certainly most of us do consider where those shadows are and what time of the day the shadows are. For instance, in colder months, it's ideal to have, sun on sidewalks where people are going to be active in the mornings. Winter shadows obviously are much, much longer. If this building was a 4-story building, it would have shadows reaching the front of the Bower Lofts in December. Between the two equinoxes, through my review, the shadows were not, so they were in keeping with the criteria in our urban design manual. Now, those numbers also apply more so to the impacts just on the property itself. But in this case, I did look at it specifically with impacts on the building face and in particular units on the Bower Lofts, and determined that the impacts were about a 2-hour period, and then they did all have access to sunlight for a good portion of the day.
Thank you.
Okay, that looks like that's it for questions from council. Thank you for all of those. Appreciate it, Max. I'm going to move on to register delegations, but before I do, I just wanted to note that Waterloo City Council welcomes and encourages members of the public to comment on matters of interest to them. However, delegates are cautioned that derogatory or inappropriate remarks may constitute slander and could potentially lead to legal action against them. No member of council, staff, or delegation shall use offensive language or language which is discriminatory in nature based on an individual's race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, marital status, family status, disability, or any other protected ground under the Human Rights Code. Contravention will result in the microphone being muted and the delegate will not be permitted to continue speaking, and the comments will not be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. And I just wanted to highlight that as we have a large number of delegates registered this evening, if you agree with previous delegations and you prefer to just indicate that you agree, you're very welcome to do so. At the same token, I recognize that many of you will have put a lot of effort into your presentations this evening and comments, and so any new information is more than welcome. This will just assist us in advancing tonight's meeting. Thank you for that. And I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward, starting with Trevor Hawkins, partner at MHBC, and Dermot Sweeney from Sweeney & Co. Architects. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Bodley. And members of council, I'll try and be brief because we have a number of delegates to speak after me. Here on behalf of the ownership team, represented by Aidan Sweeney, who is in the room here with me this evening. Sweeney & Co. Architects were the architects of the building that's before us on the screen this evening for the property located at John Street West and King Street North. Just to maybe highlight some of the questions that came out, the daycare is located at the corner. This is the ground floor, showing the ground floor overlaid on the site plan with some of the conceptual streetscape elements. So the daycare is proposed at this corner with the outdoor amenity area next to it, so outside the building in this location. This shows the entry into the site from John Street, where the vehicles would come in. All of the parking is within the structure, either below grade or above grade, and the spaces along the street at street level are all activated. So there's a mixture of residential lobby space, retail space, the daycare, the outdoor amenity area for the daycare. Other than the vehicular entrance to the building, the ground floor is all activated. Just to Councillor Rowe's point about amenity space, this is the rooftop area, so it shows the indoor. So this is effectively the 7th floor of the building. So the parking podium underneath, the entire outdoor area in 2 different locations is planned as outdoor amenity area, and then the purple area is planned as indoor amenity area. So the residents of the building will have 4-season opportunities for amenity congregation, either inside or outside the building. This just shows the typical floor plan, just to illustrate some of the points Max made about the separation. So the tower has been situated on the sort of southeasterly part of the site to accommodate a step back from John Street, a larger step back from Caroline Street. It exceeds the setback from King Street. So this gives separation, as Max alluded to, specifically to the Bauer development by nature of the separation of where that building is and where this building is proposed. But it also takes into consideration the separation from the towers on the other side of Caroline Street, the 155 in particular. So by positioning the building further towards King Street, it provides more separation from that building as well. Traffic, I understand from Max that there were a number of questions about the traffic from the project and the traffic study, and Max has noted that the study was updated to include traffic generated from the residential component, the retail component, and the daycare component, and that's all captured in the study. The study also looked at the, I suppose, approved development on the other corner of King and John Street and the traffic that would be generated from that building, although it's not built yet, and sort of encapsulated all of that traffic flow from the proposed projects, the existing projects, as well as future growth projecting out to 2035, and determined that the roads were capable of accommodating the projected increases in traffic. And with regard to the region, of course, hasn't made any comments. The region didn't require a traffic study for the project. The region's trying to move towards a much greater modal shift so that they're, in their transportation master plan, they're trying to drive towards, and Councillor Rowe will remember this from a meeting we had last week, the region is trying to drive people so that the single car occupant vehicular trips are reduced significantly over what they are today. So in projecting out forwards, the region's trying to encourage people to walk, to use transit, of course, and to cycle rather than using their car for all their trips. Just to touch on some of the points Councillor Wright raised, included some streetscape design elements here, some conceptual plans to illustrate the space. These ones are along King Street. We're looking north along King Street, looking south along King Street. So there's the space between the curb and the property line, and then there's 4 meters from the property line to the building. So there's lots of space in there within which we can design an appealing public realm. That will obviously involve coordination with the region and the city. It being a regional road, the region has requirements when you're designing landscape and streetscape elements within the right-of-way, but we'll work with both the region and the city to make it an appealing and an inviting space. Along John Street, so the opportunities here are to use silva-cells, so buried cells within the ground to support tree growth. There's enough space between the curb, as Max has indicated, between the curb and the entry to the building to accommodate trees. The hydro lines that are along John Street today are actually only serving the buildings that are on the property today. So when those buildings are removed, those poles won't be necessary. So this is, Max and Inova Power have had these discussions, and they relayed these discussions to us. So the transformer would be located closer towards the Caroline Street side, and there won't be a need to have hydro-related infrastructure along the John Street streetscape, which will allow for more flexibility in terms of softscaping along that interface. This is the changes that were made from the original submission to try and increase the articulation and the design of the north-facing facade, because a number of the residents who inhabit the Bauer development to the north, of course, will be looking, if they're looking at the lower part of the building, this is what they would see. So there's an opportunity to do some public art, a mural, which we will, again, work with the city to design an appealing mural along that one building facade. And then the ground floor has been opened up with some glazing, a little bit more articulation to try and improve that view. In summary, so Max has touched on a number of these things. This is a terrific location for intensification. It steps from the LRT. It's very close to the Iron Horse Trail. You can walk out the Caroline Street side of this building, cross the street, and you're on the Iron Horse Trail. You can take the Laurel Trail up towards Waterloo Park. There's a number of major employers in the area. Uptown Waterloo is very close by. There's a number of employers in Kitchener that are a few stops away on the Ion train. So the location of this site lends itself to consideration of maximizing its intensification opportunities. And Max is correct in when you're looking at these types of sites, major transit station areas, urban growth centers, you have to take into consideration not only Waterloo's specific boundary constraints and its ability to grow beyond its boundary, but the region of Waterloo's constraints and its desire to keep its growth within the countryside line. And in order to retain that growth within the countryside line, you do have to make the most of opportunities like these ones in major transit station areas to provide the needed housing that the population growth of Ontario and Canada is requiring that we provide. We have to take advantage of these opportunities so that we don't force growth, either expanding the urban area boundaries or forcing the growth into communities that are outside the urban area where people will have to inevitably drive to a number of their jobs or their week-to-week needs. So we saw this as a terrific opportunity to provide housing, to provide it in an area where you won't have to use your car, and to augment the public realm, to sort of take all of the great things that are happening in this neighborhood, work with those elements, and make the John Street side even better. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Trevor. I will look to council to see if there are any questions to the delegation. Councillor Freeman?
Through Chair Bodley to Mr. Hawkins. So a question that was asked earlier was condo versus rental. Is that decided?
Through you, Chair Bodley, to Councillor Freeman, the ownership team has not decided. There are obviously a number of new incentives that have arisen with regard to rental housing, so they're taking those into consideration. And with a project of this nature, we're sort of 14 months from submission to approval, so you don't want to make your decisions too early in your planning process, because the planning process can take a number of years really to get through, so the decision hasn't been made yet.
My second question is with regard to as-of-right zoning. So the property did have as-of-right zoning for, I guess, 81 meters tower. And so can you help unpack why you didn't want to go with as-of-right zoning? It seems like Mr. Kerrigan has made an argument that this built form may be better, but I just wondered if you had a planning opinion about that as well.
Well, through you, Chair Bodley, there's probably two components that I would answer. I would agree with Max. I mean, there were a number of comments that staff expressed where they wanted us to make the tower slimmer, bring the tower in, create step backs, make the tower footprint smaller. So the tower footprint itself is less than what the bylaw would permit. But in order to provide the housing that we think is needed in the community and is appropriate for a location like this in a major transit station area, in order to make up those bedrooms, the tower got a little bit higher. So it got slimmer, but it got higher to make up for those bedrooms. And the increase in 2-bedroom units was also a factor in driving up the sort of floor area as well.
Any other questions of council for the delegate? Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Bodley. So in my read, I think we have 68 more bedrooms, and so I'm wondering why the addition of bachelor units specifically?
Through you, Chair Bodley, I think the sort of provision of bachelor units, 1-bedroom units, larger 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units provides 3 or 4 options for those who want to live in the building, and the bachelor units being a little bit smaller will be price-wise a lower rent or a lower purchase price. So it would allow those who are really seeking a smaller footprint or living, they don't need the space, and there are lots of people in Waterloo region and moving to Waterloo region who don't want a large footprint because they spend so much time outside their unit, and this type of product meets that need.
Just to follow up on the actual building standards, so are you, there are a lot of balconies on this particular design, and I'm just wondering if you're incorporating thermal breaks between the balconies and the units and whether they will have individual thermal controls or not.
That, through you, Chair Bodley, that's a little bit outside my area of expertise. I know that Sweeney and Co. and the ownership group, and I think this was touched on in the informal, although it was before you came to council, they're very committed to sustainable design. They're sort of exploring at the forefront of a number of different building elements that would not only improve the sort of energy performance of the building, but other ways to sort of offset the carbon generation or the reliance on fossil fuels to generate the heat in the first place. So I am aware that they are very driven towards that type of a building design, but I can certainly get back to you with an answer to that very specific question.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Any other questions from council? Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Trevor. I just actually wondered if you could give us some information about the parking and if everything is going to be either EV ready or future ready.
Through you, Chair Bodley, every space will have conduit so that it could be converted into an EV space.
Mayor McCabe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Wondered if you were touching a little bit on the carbon reduction piece. a couple of developers I've spoken to in the past little bit have said that it's they described it as table stakes to be using heat pumps and things like that rather than gas throughout new builds like this. Do you know what the intention is in terms of heating and cooling for this? Will it be heat pumps that they're going to use to further drive down the carbon emissions?
I think I'm looking over at the ownership group because he has some expertise in this area, and he's nodding his head that that's something they're exploring for sure.
Okay, great. I think it's a really great option. Also, just wondered if you could comment on the wind issue, like I asked Max.
If you just bear with me for a second, I'll pull out the
Okay,
the wind
thank you.
diagrams. Yeah. I'm at the age where I have to take my glasses off to see these things, I'm afraid. So the wind study has the existing condition, and it has the proposed condition. So the study looked at the summer and the winter, looking at the proposed massing in the summer condition around the site, so that the actual traveled portion of John Street would be suitable for standing in the summer. The sidewalk, the majority of the sidewalk around the building on King, John, and all of it around the building on Caroline would be suitable for sitting. And then the northwest corner of the building, where we'd be looking at some mitigation measures for the one piece of the daycare space, suitable for standing or sitting, but we'd want to have that suitable for sitting. And then the parking lot between this property and the Bauer Tower itself is a mixture of suitable for standing or sitting. So, we can look at opportunities to landscape the Caroline Street side. Obviously, beyond our property, we'd have to have conversations with the city to see if there's something they would do in the right-of-way to offset any wind that would go through the parking lot. And then in the winter condition, in the proposed once the building is built, again, the majority of the surrounding property is suitable for standing, which is really ideal for pedestrian environments, except for the traveled portion of John Street, so where the cars would be. And then again, there's a few spots within the surface parking lot of the Bauer property, which would be a mixture of standing or strolling. So a little bit windier in the winter, because obviously the westerly winds will come through a little bit stronger in the winter. So we can work with the city. There's the holding provision in place, as Max alluded to, which would be an opportunity to look at potential mitigation measures at grade.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's helpful. And just, if I could, just another question about fire suppression. Given the height that's being proposed, is there additional fire suppression being built into or would be proposed for a building of this height?
Through you, Chair Bodley, I know they looked at the availability of water pressure. And again, if you will bear with me, I think it's certainly well within or well beyond the minimum standards for water pressure to fight a fire. But as this project goes through the site plan and then into the building permit process, there'd be a fire flow analysis done to make sure that there's no pumps required, for example, in the building.
Okay, seeing no further, oh, sorry, Councillor Freeman.
Sorry, I'm just gonna go back to the gradient study on wind. So where it says proposed massing and existing massing, is that just the difference between your October 22 and your October 23 massing? Or is existing massing without the existing structure?
It would be with the two-story buildings that are there today.
Oh, okay. So am I reading these diagrams correctly on page 20 of the gradient report that says the proposed massing for this building actually improves the wind, the wind along John Street and the Iron Horse Trail? Am I reading that correctly?
It appears that it does have a a minor improvement along John Street, and you are correct, a minor improvement along the Iron Horse Trail.
Okay. And it appears as though the winter wind conditions are the conditions that are more frequent. And again, if I'm reading this correctly, it's showing me that the existing two-story massing creates substantively more wind on John Street than the proposed massing. Am I reading that right?
You are, and that may be the easterly winds that would be deflected. And so there'd be a minor improvement along the street.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions from council to this delegate, thank you, Trevor. We will move on to other registered delegates, and our first registered delegate is Joan Heaton from Waterloo. You're welcome to come to the podium, and you will have 10 minutes. Welcome.
Mayor McCabe, council members. Max, I don't agree with everything you said. Anyway, I am not against high rises. I live at the Bower Loft. I enjoy urban living. But I do not enjoy what I'm looking at here. I have a few really big concerns. First of all is the shadow studies. We have 40-plus units in the Bower that will be facing a 30-story building, very close. We only get morning sun on that side. So those hours that we're supposed to get of sunlight are going to be non-existent. I've been watching the sun, and it's very low. And the Bower Loft is 15 stories. You're requesting 30 stories, which is double the height. And I just don't see it. They are going to be completely shadowed out, and that is 40-plus units that are going to be very, very upset. The next thing is the wind assessment. I do not agree. If you've ever walked from the Bower Kitchen to Vincenzo's, you will know what a wind tunnel is like. And that's only a 15-story building beside a 2-story building. Can you just imagine the wind tunnel between a 15-story building and a 30-story building? It's going to be massive. And they say that they will, I was reading today and I thought this was kind of interesting, that they will plant some trees that will alleviate this problem. Where are they going to plant the trees? They want right now I can see now it's a 0.6 difference between the Bower property and the construction that's going up. That's less than 2 feet. Where are they going to plant trees in less than 2 feet? I don't think that's possible. Are they going to plant them in the middle of our parking lot? That's not going to work. The next thing I am really opposed to is the side yard setback. If you look at the map that we have here, the part that juts out, if council, you have this, I'm sure you do, they want to change that to a 0.6 meter setback. That will be from the Bower line. And also, that Bower line is also our parking garage. So it's the walls of our parking garage. And I can't see construction going 2 feet beside a parking garage wall, excavating. To me, that looks like trouble. So changing it to 0.6 meters is wrong. My next concern is traffic congestion. The traffic congestion already on Caroline Street, when you have people coming into Vincenzo's, you've got people dropping off to the Caroline Street apartments, is bad. So I can't just imagine what the traffic congestion is going to be on Little Caroline Street and John Street. And not only with this building, but 2 24-story buildings that are going up between John and Sun Life So that's increasing the traffic big time. Next thing I'm concerned about is, I don't know whether you've thought about this, but parking for trades. Where are your construction people going to park? All these people that are going to be working on this building. When the Caroline Street building was being built, the trades parked on the former Dairy Queen lot because they let them rent out their lot. Now that is the Burger Priest, so that's no longer available. They also parked off John Street, which is now fenced off for construction. So this is going to be interesting for all the construction workers, the trades, the plumbers, the electricians, et cetera. Where are they going to park? The Bauer parking lot has now put forced security. So we've got people monitoring our parking lot, and they'll be ticketed if they park longer than 2 hours. So we're very much aware of what's coming up. You talk about housing for families, daycare. These are small units. I can't see big families, or even with 1 or 2 children living this. I'm taking into consideration there's been a new condo building on Union Street. It's for rentals that's just gone up. And they're renting, and their largest unit is a 2-bedroom unit, but it's under 1,000 square feet. And it's renting for $2,800. To me, this is not family affordable or family large enough. So those are my comments. I hope you will definitely take them into consideration, Council, because I think they're very important, and I would hate to see all of these things happen after the condo is built, and you see all of these things happen, and you're going to think, oh my God, why didn't we think of that? So please take it into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Joan. You could stay at the podium there in case there are any questions from council. You're not off the hook yet, Joan, but thank you.
Sorry.
I will just look to council and see if anybody has any questions for Joan. Councilor Roach, go ahead.
Through you, Chair Bodley. Not so much a question, but a comment. And I really thank you for your presentation. And it really struck me with the wind, and the wind that you talked about, you know, around the Bauer Kitchen. I've experienced that a lot. I mean, I'm there. I go to the Bauer Kitchen a lot. My daughter works at the Bauer Kitchen, so I'm there often. And I really do sense, in maybe no other part of Waterloo, that there's a lot of wind in that section.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Roach. Councilor Wright?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Bodley. I'm just wondering if
I'm having a hard time hearing.
Can you hear me now?
Pardon me?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So there has been quite a bit of construction in that zone over the last number of years. I mean, the Caroline Street apartments, the Park Street apartments, across the way on Caroline, the Circa building, the Red building. So have you lived through each of these construction phases at the Bauer?
Actually, that's a good question, because I moved into the Bauer building before they were finished constructing. I had the elevator going up outside my unit. Yes, I've lived through it, and they've been really good. And I really appreciate, like, the Caroline Street condos, the way they have landscaped. It's just beautiful, and how they have incorporated the Iron Trail and the landscaping they've done along there. They've done a beautiful job.
And so I'm just curious, too, about your experience with the sub-trades and the parking during those construction phases. Were you affected at that point, or was there sufficient parking back then?
As I mentioned, they had places to park
Okay,
that are no longer in existence.
okay. Thanks for that.
Okay, seeing no further questions from council, thank you again, Joan. Feel free to
Okay,
have a
thank you.
seat. Thank you. I'm going to call on our next registered delegate, which is Richard Magnuson. Please come to the podium. Thank you, and you have 10 minutes.
Honorable Mayor, member of council, and staff. My name is Richard Magnuson. I am the president of 155 Caroline Condo and the past president of 144 Park Street Condo. My background is manufacturing of furniture internationally, with 10,000 people making furniture under our brand. Currently, I'm developing residential properties in Naples, Florida, and I've lived in Waterloo all my life, and my wife and I consider it our primary residence, and we love it at 155. Let me be clear. We are pleased that there is development being considered on the corner of King, John, and Caroline Street. It'll be nice to clean up that area of older homes and along the King and John border there. However, we, the majority of 155 Caroline, are opposed to the official plan amendment number 39, zone bylaw Z 2211. There are 3 people speaking tonight, this evening, from 155 condos, and we will also present, I have 100+ petition against it, and that is growing because we've had very limited time to put it together. When the zoning calls for 25 floors, that's what we believe was a good number and still high, but we support that. So I just wanted to say basically 2 points. My comments are going to be fairly brief. We did not receive a notice in proper time. I only received the notice that was dated the 17th or the 13th of September. I received it on the 18th, which was just 2 days before we had to respond to get onto this list. And so we did not really have proper time to prepare for this meeting. And the second phase is gone to 30 stories. That was significantly different than the other notices. And so we at 155 feel that 25 is going to compound traffic, but it is, we do agree with the not using farmland and bringing high-rises in downtown. So in communication with our lawyer, we have a cause to challenge this short notice period that was practically played out. And it was not just my notice that was 2 days' notice. Some only had 1 day when we asked people around the building. So we are considering hiring a planner to challenge many of the assumptions and studies presented. We don't believe all the study notes. And let me just bunny trail here for a real short minute. I was the president of 144. Our front door, because of the wind tunnel from Clerica at the time, came down and tore our door off 8 times. After 4, and a grandmother and a grandson knocked off their feet, the board got involved and said, we've got to do something about this. So we took a common sense approach and said, look, why don't we just put in the sliding door that Vincenzo's has, and there's no more door to hinge. Mind you, the professionals and the engineers took it 4 more times the door came off. They spent another $20,000 with wind panels, and then they ended up putting the Vincenzo sliding door. So I'm not opposed to the professionals. We need them, but sometimes practical is important. So let me just say our goal here tonight is, number 1, that the city not allow the 30 stories and hold the 25 stories according to the current bylaw, or at least pause on this amendment so that we can have a second opinion look into this. And failing to do that, we do understand our right to take it to the Ontario Land Use Tribunal for them to review. It's not really our desire. We'd like to work with the city, but we will consider it. And thank you for your time, and our 2 other delegates will speak next. Any questions for me, or?
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, if you could just stick at the podium there, I would appreciate that in case there are questions. But first, I might look to staff if anyone would like to make some comments about the timing of the notices that were received by residents and provide some clarification for council and the public on that. That would be appreciated. Yeah, Max, go ahead.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Magnuson. Through you, Chair Bartley, to the resident. So I understand, and I heard a lot about, people receiving the notification the Wednesday or the Tuesday following the week, giving approximately 24 hours and maybe less in some cases to provide comments to be included in the council packet. And I think there was some misunderstanding that the commenting period is in fact still open. Anyone can still stand up who's not necessarily a registered delegate to speak on this matter tonight, but I understand there was a misunderstanding there, and the last thing I think anyone would want is to feel that they have less than 24 hours to provide comments on such a substantial application, so I can understand the frustration there. And with respect to notifications not being received for the informal public meeting in September 22 and the neighborhood meeting, we use an internal mapping system that you take an area, you go outside. We actually exceed the required area in the Planning Act, and to make sure we capture a wider area, and whatever that mapping spat out a series of addresses, and for some reason they didn't necessarily align for all three, but that's the system we use. And with respect to the late notice Canada Post, I'm not sure why it was received on the 17th versus the 13th. But
Practically, we got it very short, and I don't think there's a misunderstanding. We knew we had time to prepare for tonight from that period, but it is a very short period of time of that notice, and we could blame Canada Post, because it does seem like a long time from the 13th of September to get it a few doors over from this building to our building.
Yeah, thank you, Max. I just appreciated that clarification, wanted council to see that. And before I look to council to see if there are any questions for the delegate here, I will also highlight, as I should have earlier, that there is a number of correspondence that council did receive that are in the packet that I'm sure all of us reviewed. So with that, I'll look to see if anybody has any questions for the delegate. Seeing none, thank you, Richard. I will move on to the next registered delegate, coincidentally also Richard, but this time Richard Dixon, if you could come to the podium. And again, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yep. As Mr. Magnuson was very brief, hopefully I can beg a couple of moments from his slot too. I'm Richard Dixon. You don't know me by name, but maybe by what I've accomplished in the city here. In the early 2000s, I was Vice President in redevelopment at Grand River Hospital and responsible for the major renovation and build at that time, where we built a new emergency dialysis, children childbirth, mental health, ICU, lots of stuff down at Freeport, withdrawal management over on Park Street, and helping my friends at St. Mary's Hospital. And the project of my 40-year career, which was a highlight, was the building of the Grand River Regional Cancer Center. But if you ask staff, their favorite part was the Tim Hortons. And we spent about $250 million in today's money. I've also spent 15 years with the Canadian Standards Association, writing healthcare standards and teaching it across Canada, and also in the Middle East. Let me talk about what's a bylaw, because I seem to be qualified to talk about standards, bylaws, and guidelines. A bylaw is a municipal law under the authority of the province. The responsibility to uphold the bylaw is that of City Council, and that's why we're here. So I'm going to talk about some of the issues that Mr. Kerrigan brought up and others. The number one issue on his documentation was density. And the density is described in the bylaw as bedrooms per hectare. For those who don't know, a hectare is about 2.5 acres, and an acre is about the size of a football field. So the density in the bylaw is 750. The proposal by the applicant is 1,610. That's 115% greater than the bylaw. The building height, as mentioned, is 25 to 30 stories. The street setback on John Street, 5 meters down to 1.7. The street setback on Caroline, 5 meters to 2. Side yard, 1.5 to 0.6. Jones comment, extremely short. And if you actually calculated the area on the property devoted to landscaping in those narrow confines, about 1%. Not good enough. In the city's documentation, Mr. Kerrigan went through that reasonably quickly, but those of us with more time read all of this in detail. And he's mentioned about the density issue. I'll go through that with a few comments, but in the document packet that we received, and it was on the screen earlier, here a picture of the building on PDF page 50. It shows the applicant's building, one vertical rectangle over a horizontal rectangle, adjoining the Bauer and the Circa buildings. There it is. And if somebody like me happened to count the floors on this building, it's 27 floors. Hopefully that's a mistake, and because it did look a little short when I looked at it, but someone will have to make comment on that elsewhere. In the documentation from the staffs, Mr. Kerrigan went through that too, and I'll read a few of the lines in here and comment. Contribute to the healthy and livable community by adding new housing. Absolutely, we need new housing here, but you're really squeezing people into a very big building, evidenced by the bedrooms per hectare at 115% over the limits of the bylaw. Efficient use of land and existing infrastructure. I disagree. I think it's very inefficient, squeezing people. Transit supportive? Great. You're on the ION. Does that mean that every ION station qualifies for intensification? I hope not. And cost-effective development patterns. I actually don't know what that means. Does that mean more density is intensification? One of my favorite real-life comments here is traffic. I'll give you the real life from Caroline Street. UPS and FedEx couriers park on Caroline Street. Could be 10, 15, 20 minutes each. The food delivery vendors, Uber, Skip the Dishes, they park on Caroline Street. Amazon truck parks on Caroline Street, on both sides. Canada Post, they're there for about half an hour, parking on Caroline Street. Taxis dropping off people, personal vehicles coming, picking up other people on Caroline Street, wait. And somewhat, my least favorite thing is when the fire department send the truck over to Vincenzo's to buy food and coffee for their staff, and we admire the fire department greatly, but they bring a big fire truck and park it on Caroline Street. Thank you very much. Traffic should be looked at in an accumulation of what the traffic is in the neighborhood, not at your front door. What is the cumulative effect of all of these buildings on some residential streets that were built for low-rise buildings? What's the cumulative effect of all the traffic with Sun Life, their two towers, Caroline, Circa, 144 Park, Bauer, new building next to Circa coming also. It should be about the cumulative effect, not what each building does. And a good point by Joan, where the contractor is going to park. You could be looking at 100 vehicles per day. That's a lot. Sun access. Excellent point brought up by Joan too, of shadowing their building, and those of us who get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and look out, by the time the sun rises at 6 and gets to 9 o'clock, where the standard starts, the sun is low in the sky and would shadow the building for at least 3 hours. Parking is another issue. We happen to have some parking in our building owned actually by the Vincenzo's property owners, and that's full all the time. Mr. Kerrigan mentioned the wider public realm, which I presume means the setback, the sidewalk, and the boulevard. People don't necessarily walk on the boulevard, although Mr. Kerrigan's slide showed all concrete. I hope it's not concrete. Also in his presentation, he showed the perimeter of the building with the trees for mitigation of wind. It's well known in the building industry that trees play a very limited effect on wind mitigation because they only cover the existing one levels that they're at. The trees were planted in our property were about 7 feet tall, and the stem of the tree was about 1 inch in diameter. It takes 15 to 20 years for a tree to grow up big enough to have any effect. Our trees, I went and measured them today, they're about 10, 11 feet. They got a long way to go, and they got another 10 or 15 years to go. I also work with the National Research Council of Canada, and they have a document going back to 1993 that says wind effects on buildings are mostly quantifiable by using wind tunnel measurements. My colleagues in the engineering world, people in the room here with engineering backgrounds would know a company called WSP Engineering. Our solutions include adjusting the shape of the building to make it more aerodynamic, using wind tunnel analysis, working closely with architects to refine the shape of the building. Talked a lot about the setbacks being very minimal, and they are minimal. But I also indicate that because people mention the words grass. We tried grass for a couple of years, and with the amount of, excuse my expression, dog pee on it, it was destroyed, and plants destroyed. And with that comes with the Iron Horse Trail, which in the winter, courtesy of the region, has a lot of salt on it. Our streets have a lot of salt. That washes up onto the planted areas and destroys a lot of plants. And we have minimal setbacks.
Richard, I just wanted to highlight that you have 1 minute remaining.
Okay, thank you. So the issue here is really about you need to do a comprehensive wind analysis for the entire area and a traffic analysis, and don't just read documents. You got to stand out in the street in real life. And we'd like to see some information on that electrical vehicle that was mentioned, and the requirements for disabilities within a building. One of our residents is here tonight in his wheelchair and would like to know, and so hopefully that can be forwarded to me. But I did note on the very last page of Mr. Kerrigan's memo here, temporary vehicle parking on John Street be evaluated, including options to better accommodate deliveries, drop-offs, and the like, especially because there's a daycare. Are you really thinking that daycare people are going to park in the street and take their small children out on a busy street? Or are you going to have some parking for them? The famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright said, "Form follows function." Great saying. How about, and finance, another F in that, has to be considered. But in respect of present company, the city does collect a lot of revenue through taxation in this system. And the bigger the building, the more taxes the city will create. And I think the fifth F here is, as Mr. Magnuson indicated, this proposal is flawed, and it needs a total relook. These architects and other people that are here today, I've looked at some of their projects, and they're great. They can produce great projects, and I think you need to have another second look at this so we all don't have to go to the land use tribunal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate your presentation here today. Again, I'll ask you to stick at the podium in case there are questions from council, and I see one from Councilor Freeman.
So I just had a question with regard to the WSP comments that you've made reference to, because I didn't see any reports from WSP related to this
No, they're just an
application.
engineering company that I've worked with, and just to say that engineering companies know how to do this.
Well, it's just that the wind study was a computational fluid dynamic study
Yes.
done by Gradient. Is that not?
I've not seen it, and it's not,
Oh,
it's not mentioned.
Okay, it is part of the application. It's online, and it was done using the processes that you just made reference to, so I just was
And
confused.
was it
by
done
your
for the
comment.
entire 30 stories?
It was done actually for all the buildings across the entire block and all the
Okay.
way out to Allen Street. So
Okay,
King
good.
to Allen
Yeah.
and John to,
Yeah.
yeah.
As an engineering type, I have an anemometer which measures wind speed. At the curb on a windy day, it's about 20 kilometers an hour. In my apartment balcony on the 20th floor, it's 60 kilometers an hour.
I think that aligns with what this study is saying, like it's showing 7 meters per second at ground level, so it does seem to align with what you're saying. So,
The
thank you.
higher up you go, the windier it is.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Any other questions for this delegate? Okay, no, thank you, Richard, again.
Okay, thank you
no-
very much.
Since there are no further questions for this delegate, we'll move on to the next delegate. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to see if council will permit me to take a brief 5-minute recess. Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute recess and come back for the rest of the delegates. Thanks. Okay, thank you for that brief break. We're going to continue down our list of registered delegations, and I will turn to Ashwin Annamalai, resident of Waterloo, who has 10 minutes. Welcome, Ashwin.
Good evening, councillors and my dear neighbors. My name is Ashwin, and I'm here to share my personal story on what it is like living near a construction site and next to a high-rise building. For over a year, a 25-story tower was built just 100 meters away from my home. The construction noises started early in the morning at 6 a.m., completely relentless. It was drilling, banging, welding. Imagine being a night owl and being woken up at 6 a.m. before sunrise for half of the year to these sounds. I suffered from headaches every day. My balcony became unusable because of the construction noise. Like, I couldn't spend time there. The windows got clouded with construction dust, blocking sunlight, fresh air, and at night, the lights blared nonstop from the cranes and from the site itself. Concrete trucks drove in and out endlessly. Tarps and debris scattered everywhere. Well, I could solve some of these problems with the help of blinds during the night and earplugs during the day, but it did impact my quality of life, absolutely. However, after a year, it ended and the early noises stopped, but we had a new set of problems, like the loss of privacy and wind tunnels. So I fully empathize with the concerns with the residents and their valid apprehension about construction and the impact of high rises. The pain felt is real. But we must also consider the incredible gains our community can make by coming together tonight. So one day when I was walking near this completed tower, I ran into an old university friend, one of the smartest computer scientists that I know. I learned that she had just moved into the very same building that was near my house. Soon, more people that I went to university with and their friends and friends of friends followed and started living in that building. They were computer experts, engineers, architects from all across Canada and the world. So together we started what's Crafts Night, and we did it every week. So we did crafts together, we cooked together, we played games, we planned hiking trips, and this is how community blooms organically. Had council rejected this tower due to opposition, Waterloo would have lost dozens of bright minds. We simply cannot afford to lose talent. Many people come to this great city to pursue their studies. A lot of them stay back to work tirelessly for our community. A few have even become the mayor of Waterloo. Many people, approving housing, it protects our green belt and preserves nature. Higher density means lower costs. For a good example would be the electricity delivery charges that we see in our electricity invoices. So that's going to go down when we have more housing. And also, it also reins in the increase in property taxes as we have more and more dense housing. But my most favorite point of all is that I would rather have a heart attack near Allen Station than near Rim Park. So some may believe that most of the community opposes this development based on correspondence and attendance today, but I'd like to point out that it is selection bias. Only immediate neighbors were consulted and informed. Some people got the information with 2 days remaining or 1 day remaining. I got none. So how did I end up here? My friend, Dr. Craig Sloss, had to dig through hundreds of pages of paperwork to find about this proposal, and so I could register on time to be here today. The construction is temporary, the community is permanent. The hundreds that are housed here will be our nurses, they will be our doctors, they will be our bus drivers, they will be our cashiers, they're going to be the essential workers that are going to keep our city running. They'll be the next generation, our kids, our grandkids, our nephews, our nieces. I know some still have concerns over shadows and noise, but imagine the shadows cast over entire families if we were to block housing during a housing crisis. Think about the anguish of hardworking students and young professionals. Where would they live if they were pushed out of the city that they help run, and now this place is out of reach? Solutions exist to mitigate construction impacts, but for those without stable housing, no mitigation is possible. No earplug can drown out the anxiety over where they will live next week. Let's come together and let's make the sacrifices needed to house our own community. Many of you will remember a different Waterloo from decades past, but to thrive, cities must grow. Neighborhoods must welcome younger residents looking to write their own futures. We must not just open our hearts, but also our neighborhoods for more construction. The construction period will pass. The generations of family thanking you for giving them a home in this city will remain. I would like to leave this podium with one question. Do we want to go down in history as the people who opened our hearts and neighborhoods to house more people during an unprecedented housing crisis? Or do we want to be remembered as people who tried to block housing when people were struggling to find a place to call home? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ashwin, and on behalf of the rest of council, I hope you don't have a heart attack at Allen Station or at Rim Park or anywhere else in the city. If you could stick at the podium, I'll look to council to see if anyone has any questions for Ashwin. Okay, seeing none, thank you again, Ashwin. I will move on to our next registered delegation, and the next registered delegate is Carol Dixon. Excuse me. Thank you, Carol. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. So Mayor and councilors, here, I'll stand over here. So I'm Carol Dixon, and I live at 155 Caroline. And the first thing I want to say is that my living area actually faces north. Well, sort of as north as anything gets in Waterloo, but really that way. So I'm not really talking about my view and my shadows. I really want to talk about my neighbors and my neighborhood. It's a wonderful neighborhood, and we always knew our neighborhood would fill up full of condos, and so it should. It's really the amendments to this condominium building that's making it too tall, really too big for the space, too close to the street, too close to the sidewalk. It's really too everything. I just need to speak a little bit about this process. Apparently, the informal public meeting was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle, and I really have to confess, I haven't seen a Waterloo Chronicle in years. It doesn't come to the building. I didn't really know we still had the Waterloo Chronicle, and if there's somebody here, I'm really sorry. So I didn't know about that. I get, like, the City of Waterloo Active Newsletter. I get the City of Waterloo e-News, which I think comes from the mayor's office. I get the City of Waterloo Public Library newsletter, cleverly named Check It Out. I get the City News 570 in my inbox, and I never got that letter. I never got any information about that meeting. So maybe you need to think about how you sort of distribute that. The neighborhood information meeting that was held in April, we got no notice, and we were not invited. And Mr. Kerrigan explained that there's some magic thing that picks up the postal codes, and that's where it should have gone. But you know what? We weren't invited. We didn't get to go. I would have really loved to have gone and seen that information and seen those pictures, because I had to read 106 pages about it. And I don't think it's fair that we didn't get invited and we didn't get to go. I wanted to go. I would have liked to have gone. And I've spoken to lots of people in my building, and we weren't invited at all. And I think for that reason alone, you should really delay this application. Caroline Street is really busy, and I'm sorry that really didn't, I know apparently there was a traffic study, but Caroline Street is actually busier than King Street at that point. John Street is really busy with cars and delivery trucks and vehicles and all the cyclists that spill off the street and the scooters and the e-bikes and all the pedestrians running back and forth from Vincenzo's. I also need to talk a little bit about the wind. It's windy in Waterloo, and the wind tunnel created, which is worse since Circa was added just up the street. Really, we've lost entire pieces of furniture, and an entire glass tabletop off a dining room table took flight and landed on Wenda's balcony. It's really windy. It's not just the pedestrian wind assessment, it's really the wind up on the floors. And I do need to speak a little bit about the shadows. The shadow focus study really focuses on Bauer, and I'm really sorry that Bauer is going to be in the shade all the time. But it really doesn't mention 155 Caroline, and we're almost right across the street. And actually, in all the pictures, we're not even there. It just disappears. And in one picture, there's a flock of birds where we should be. But this really enormous 30-story building will certainly come across the street in Shadow 155, and it's not mentioned in any of the considerations. And that's another miss. So we were missed for that, and we were missed in the shadow consideration. We missed the neighborhood invention. I just feel like, I feel a little neglected, really. Sorry, I'm getting a little agitated. But I'm a walker. I really walk the neighborhood. I walk my dog. I take the Ion. I walk uptown. It's a great neighborhood. We really need some condos in this neighborhood because it's a wonderful neighborhood and we're really prepared to share it. But I need a bigger setback, and I was really interested to see Mr. Kerrigan's presentation that made the setback look really big on the picture, and I don't know if that was just the picture, because when I read the words, it really didn't sound like it was going to be a big setback at all, and I was really very worried. It looked like it was only going to be like 1 meter, which is really terribly unfriendly. You did allow, for my building, 155 Caroline, an adjusted setback. And you know what? It was a mistake. And I'm happy to tell you, it was mostly the council that was here before, it wasn't you. And you let 155 have a smaller setback to the street. You allow the addendum, and it's too close to the street. You come out of our building, and there's cyclists, and there's pedestrians, and there's parents with their giant strollers. It's really too close to the street. It shouldn't have happened. But what are you going to do now? My building is there. So maybe we can sort of learn from that mistake. I know there's just this one building in front of you tonight, but you really need to think about this whole neighborhood. There's Bauer, there's 155 Caroline, there's 144 Park, there's Circa, there's the new building where the senior center used to be that's going to be going up. There's the 2 more on Sun Life property who will almost certainly come here with their own addendums and adjustments and all of those things. And really that's thousands more people and not one blade of grass. Squares of hardscape, which I think honestly is code for concrete, squares of hardscape at the busiest, noisiest corner at John and King, where you're actually going to have to talk to your friends like this because it's really loud and noisy at that corner. Yeah, I'm really very worried. Your report states that you already know about issues with delivery vehicles, but you're hoping that the people that live in this building will walk to local services. Well, people in my building get all kinds of deliveries, and we can walk to local services too. I think it's really very optimistic that you're going to get more walking. I mean, Amazon, Uber, DoorDash, UPS, landscape trucks that come with trailers, more often than not, more than one at a time. Everybody's in a hurry. Like, nobody's going to park in a proper parking spot. They could park temporarily in the Vincenzo's lot, but they don't. They double park on Caroline because they can. I was really terrified, I have to tell you, to read on page 66 of the document that I did get about parkland dedication. And it said, parkland dedication, cash in lieu, will be calculated at the time of building permit issuance. Really? Really? You can sell my access to parkland like that? And I'm just really kind of interested at what my parkland is worth. And really, thousands of people's access to parkland will be calculated at the time of building permit issuance. Yeah, and we can take the Ion there. Instead, we can get on the Ion and go 4 stops to the park. Really? Really? And I'm worried about excessive congestion on poor little John Street, which even you have designated as a minor collector. Poor John Street was built for the single-family homes that used to be there, and it's already pretty busy. And if you're going to add this building and the 2 to come on the Sun Life property, and these people will have to use John Street, there's not going to be another option for them, it's going to be just dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. The 209 bicycle parking spots that you have, those cyclists have to get out on the street somehow. It's just a lot of volume for poor little baby John Street. Like, if you haven't been there lately, maybe you should go take a look at it. And there's not any option to make John Street any bigger. This amendment isn't really just one amendment, it's really 7 amendments. And it gives a lot more money to the developer. It doesn't provide any green space, which is your long-term neighborhood benefit. It doesn't meet your guiding principle of community-centered. It does nothing for climate action with minimal landscape spaces provided. And it wasn't advertised to us as per your very own protocol. I'm asking you to vote no to this amendment so that we don't lose this opportunity to have a community of people that can stand on the sidewalk. Just because we never really had a chance to even think about it in any of the earlier times. And if I have another minute, I just wanted to say, I used to live here. Richard and I used to live here when he was building the cancer center and all of that other stuff. And then we moved, and we've lived many places across Canada. And then when we sort of retired, we came back here because Waterloo is wonderful. It's wonderful here. In case you've forgotten, Waterloo is wonderful. And I want lots of people to live here, but I want a little bit of grass. I need a little bit of green space. I need a little bit of space on the sidewalk where I can admire their dog or their sweater. I just need a little bit of space to keep it wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Carol. Really appreciate your delegation here today, and the reminder that Waterloo is a wonderful place to live, as all of us have experienced ourselves. Before I look to council for some questions, I wanted to just personally address, you had made a reference to the Waterloo Chronicle, and sadly, since the Waterloo Chronicle was delivered for your notice, the Metroland, the parent company, has declared bankruptcy, and sadly, Waterloo Chronicle will no longer be delivering to residents, and so I'm sure that clerks and staff are looking through our legislative requirements and how we are going to be able to deliver this important notifications to residents of the city of Waterloo. And I just wanted to express my condolences to the folks that are working at Metroland, and particularly those working at the Waterloo Chronicle, because obviously it's a significant impact and loss for our community. But I will, on the flip side, make a plug for anybody who's in attendance today who's looking to get notifications about any development application throughout the entire city. We have a robust engagement platform called engagewr.ca. Every single development application across the city is on that site and is updated with reports, discussion of when meetings are, etc. So I would encourage everybody to subscribe to engagewr.ca. With that, I am going to look to council to see if there are any questions for the delegate. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, through you, Chair Bodley. I appreciate you mentioning Engage Waterloo, because that is where all the supporting documentations for this application are. So you made reference to shadow studies. Can you help me to understand what you're making reference to? Because the shadow studies that I read include every single building, including yours on Caroline Street.
Thank you, Councillor. And I threw somebody. I don't really know how to do that.
It's fine.
I read 106 pages, and the pages that I read that I was able to download didn't include 155. It only spoke to Bauer. Whether there was some kind of condensed version that I got, because I didn't see the traffic study either.
Okay.
Maybe because you're a councillor, you got more information.
Oh, no, I downloaded it all off of Engage
Okay.
Waterloo Region 2. So I get a staff report,
Okay.
and then if I want to dig deeper, and I'm an engineer, so I think weird. So I do those things, much to the dismay of some people maybe, but no, so I personally went and downloaded all those documents.
yeah.
So the shadow study, including your building, is located there. It's part of the architectural set of plans, if you'd like to look at them. With regard to, and the wind study's there too, and it is signed and sealed by a professional engineer with Gradient Wind, who only really do wind studies. That's their primary business.
Well, maybe somebody should have done a wind study before they built my building.
Well, actually, it's quite interesting, because I actually voted against 155 Caroline. So I am one of the people who was on that, and I was contrary-minded to your application. And
you were right. It's too close to the street.
there was many reasons why I voted against it. But the other piece I would like to say is that for every development like yours where you live, parkland dedication is the piece that is taken for every development. So council's not asking for something different here.
Okay.
And that is why there's been a significant investment in parks in the uptown, like Waterloo Park, Alexandria Park, Mary Allen Park, because there is that recognition that you have to advance green spaces as close to multi-residential as you can. But that's where those resources are allocated. So I appreciated you bringing that, and I just hope you don't mind me sharing a little bit of that with you.
No, thank you.
Yeah. And if anyone else wants more access to these reports, like every development, including other ones near to your development, you will find all the supporting documentations on Engage WR.
Okay.
Yeah. We've tried to make it better. I know that it's hard to find, but we have, as a city, really tried to make it better. So thank you for your comments tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Does any other councillor have a question for the delegate here today? No? Oh, sorry, Mayor McCabe, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for, I was going to raise a couple of those questions to Councillor Freeman. I just wondered, just on the Engage WR piece and the notice piece, if I could look to Carrie Van Niekerk just to comment on the post-Chronicle, which is unfortunate that we're losing that, but the post-Chronicle world and what that will look like in terms of what we'll do to notify people.
Thank you, through your chair, to the mayor for your question. We're currently working, Clerks is working, as was mentioned, to update our notification bylaw and guidelines. And on communications side, we're looking at what other options we have. So we do have the record available as a newspaper print option for any notifications that are required to be in print. And we're also looking at expanding our online offerings. So the options we have available through social media, through some of those newsletters that the delegate kindly mentioned. So putting some of this more information into those places. We're also waiting for an update from the Record/Chronicle online version. They are looking to activate a legislative notice section that will be part of their online, but we're waiting for more information from them on that.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Carol. Appreciate your presentation. I don't have a question for you, but I do have a question for staff from your presentation, so I'd ask if you could sit down, and I will direct my question to staff. The delegate had referenced sort of the setbacks, and we've talked about setbacks a fair bit here, and I'm wondering if maybe you could bring back that presentation and speak a little bit to the words versus the reality, I guess, of the setbacks that the delegate had referenced, just so that we're all on the same page about what is permitted and what is being requested by the delegate. By the developer, excuse me.
Certainly. Thank you. Through you, Councillor Bodley, to the resident and for everyone's awareness. So there's a number of setback reduction requests. This one being the setback at grade, which is 5 meters is what is within the bylaw on John Street and Caroline Street. King Street requires 4 meters. They're meeting the requirement on King Street, and they're not meeting it on Caroline or John, where they've reduced it to approximately 2 meters on Caroline, 1.7 on John. This provision in the bylaw is really to properly transition higher density neighborhoods to lower density neighborhoods, sort of that are more, typically their characteristics include front lawns. As we move from Mary Allen neighborhood and the neighborhood on the other side of Park towards this higher density strip between Park and King, the 5 meters isn't necessarily as necessarily appropriate for this space, as it's a more urban environment. It doesn't, we're not trying to mimic a front lawn, and frankly, it's more dense in this area. And there is sufficient space, as indicated, including the public realm components. Now, if you look on the side yard setback towards Bauer, if you go up one slide, this diagram indicates at the bottom, as you can see, it says 22 meters. So that is our tower separation requirement. This tower is, in fact, 34 meters from the Bauer tower. Now, say there was in addition, the staggered lot line, as you can see, where the lot line staggers, the part that is sticking further towards Bauer is the smallest reduction request. They're meeting the required setback at grade for, I forget what the percentage was, around 50% of that whole interface with Bauer. And I should note, I just lost the point I had. I had one more, one more point to add to that. I just lost it. But I suppose did that answer your question with respect to this? So the tower separation is in fact exceeded. So in essence, they could build these two towers 22 meters from each other. In this case, we're at 34 meters. So for the majority of the separation, we're in far excess of what's required through our zoning bylaw.
Yep, thank you, Max. Appreciate that. Just wanted that extra reminder of what we were talking about with the setbacks. Excuse me. My apologies. We're going to move on to the next delegate. The next registered delegate is Phil Marfisi, and he's already there. You have 10 minutes, Phil.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. I am delegating tonight to speak in favor of the recommendation to approve Official Plan Amendment 39 and the zoning bylaw amendments that accompany it. I came because I think it's vital that our city continues to approve and build the large volume of housing we desperately need in ways that support our environmental and fiscal sustainability. And to be clear, this project supports both those goals. The staff report on this was conclusive that this project is consistent with every major planning guideline that informs analyses of these projects, including both provincial and regional growth plans. However, I think projects precisely like this one actually go further in directly aligning with priorities identified in the 2023 to 2026 City of Waterloo strategic plan that was approved by this council earlier this summer. Let's take strategic priority 3, for example, that says we aim to achieve a high quality of life through strategic density, diverse housing options, and equitable access to parks and public spaces. This project is literally steps away from a light rail station. Waterloo region is one of the smallest metro areas in North America to have a light rail system, and we've committed to building transit-oriented neighborhoods alongside it. As far as parks, it is connected to dozens of them because again, it is literally steps away from our region's flagship rail trail system. Let's turn to strategic priority 4, which says we will support infrastructure and transportation options in environmentally and fiscally sustainable manners. It is well established from studies in cities like Ottawa, Halifax, and Edmonton, and many others in Canada, that infill development uses less municipal resources than suburban development, which costs cities more money to service than they bring in taxes and fees. Conversely, infill developments such as this one often pay for themselves and then some. The physical and social infrastructure deficits we face today are a result of a status quo in city planning that went on for nearly a century. As we start to move away from those trends, Waterloo, along with our fellow regional cities, has become a leader in building up instead of out. This project simply continues that precedent, and I think it's fair to say that it is in complete alignment with the policy directions the city has chosen to go in. Outside of that, of course, there is a personal element to wanting to see more housing get built. I don't need to go in depth on the housing crisis because I know you're well acquainted with it. I do feel compelled to say that projects like this are the last affordable market rate housing for my generation, at least right now. I am a massive proponent for more affordable social housing and always will be, but the fact remains that we need projects like this for the middle class, especially ones that have revised their proposals to include ratios of multi-bedroom units to this degree and which are required to be financially feasible for the builders. My generation faces economic and environmental challenges unlike anything Canada has dealt with. I don't foresee myself being able to own a home in the next decade or perhaps ever at this point in time. Rental opportunities in neighborhoods that facilitate a lower carbon footprint aren't affordable, even for those who make what we consider to be living wages and therefore would not qualify for subsidized housing. Real-world examples from cities like Minneapolis and Auckland, New Zealand are beginning to show that upzoning cities to add more dense infill like this project can slow the inflation in housing costs. If some or all of what I'm saying sounds dramatic, that's because frankly it is. The challenges we're facing can be addressed one step at a time, like tonight, if we continue to prioritize the progress that we've made. Walkable, transit-oriented neighborhoods like this one cannot be preserved in amber solely for those who have the privilege of already living there. Projects like this continue to move the needle on meeting our housing targets while supporting the strategic goals the city has chosen. I urge council to approve this and any similar applications that build up our central neighborhoods moving forward.
for that, Phil. I will look to council to see if there are any questions, for the delegate. Seeing no questions, thanks again, Phil, really appreciate that. Excuse me. Moving on to our next registered delegate, we have John Shortreed, who I understand also has a presentation. Perfect. Thank you, John. You have 10 minutes.
Mayor, members of council and staff, just because everybody's quoting how they feel about high-rise. One of the great things I think I did in Waterloo was when Auburn Development came along, they applied for 700 condo units on Barrel Yard. I met with the owner, one of the owners of Auburn, and their architect, and convinced them they should ask for 1,200 rather than 700 because it was a perfect site. They were worried about parking, which was provided more in those days, and I directed them to put the parking up higher and develop the site, got more green space. So I think everybody's in favor of more high density if it's done properly and if it preserves what is a good urban environment. Let me see if I can get the next slide. This morning on Caroline Street, the lawn maintenance people for 155 at 11 o'clock arrived. And I came back 2 hours later and they were still there. They blocked the west-southbound lane on Caroline completely, right at the entrance to Bauer Development. So, and that happens, and it's been mentioned lots of times by the people here. The mention of the traffic study that was done is, can the people from this area get to other parts of the city? It doesn't, to my understanding, address the question of access to individual properties and developments there, and that's where the problem lies. There's no problem with the main things. I mean, King Street went from 18,000 vehicles a day before the LRT down to 4,000. People still get around because there are lots of roads around Lake Park and Weber and so on. So it's the blocking of the access roads, that's deliveries, pickups, not to mention the temporary ones during construction. You may have remembered going up and down Regina Street when they constructed that condo building just north of University Avenue, where it was really a mess. The report really, even though this was mentioned in the informal report, the report really didn't address that, and that has a real big impact on residents, including the people that will live at 203 King Street. Keep in mind they've got twice as many units as Bauer Lofts, and Caroline about the same number, so there's going to be a lot more of that on-street parking because, unfortunately, places like 155 Caroline didn't provide any off-road loading and unloading areas. Bauer Development could do when they have some parking on Caroline that could be turned into a temporary truck stop or off-road loading and unloading. The end result of this is, because these get left out of the report and stuff, the developer wins, residents lose. And these residents, as I say, include people who live in these developments. The site is basically described very well on page 68 in the packet. Irregularly shaped, 30 meters, constrains the ability to develop the site with absolute adherence to the city's built form performance standards in accordance with the planned function of the lands. And it's not that there's a shortage of land to meet provincial and regional targets for housing. There's lots of available land. Several years ago, I recall the planning department provided council with a list of zoned properties and targets, and there was more than enough zoned land. So what we're talking about here is the development of specific parcels to meet some urban standard and other things. So again, because of this situation with the city coming and saying, well, they've got this site needs more development, again, the developer wins, the residents lose. One of the strange things here is the goal to help the developer by reducing setbacks. Why not follow good planning regulations and have a smaller development? This is really, on the city's part, an illogical planning goal, do poor urban design for unneeded density. Given the city has a bias towards more density and relief from zoning that represents good urban design, that's what good urban design comes in. That's the basis for having official plans and zoning to make it a pleasant place to live. And we have its example mentioned before. The zoning says 750 bedrooms per hectare. The initial proposal, 1344, and the latest proposal, 1610. Developer wins, residents lose. Reduction in zoning from building setbacks. These were presented by Max, and I don't think we need to go over them, but there are 80%, 60% for significant reductions in setbacks to increase the density, and in doing so, reduce the livability of our neighborhood. Again, to show the kind of bias that we're looking at here, blocking the sun to the Bower Lofts. The way I read the thing, it mentions June the 21st, none. March and September 21st, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. But they don't mention December 21st. So the worst half of the year is not mentioned in the report. But this is very important to the people in Bower Lofts, where I live, who have a southern exposure, because the winter is long, nights are dark. Surprisingly, there are remedies for these. Move the tower to the east from a location now on the west of the site and stick to the 25 stories. This would improve the sun. Page 80 states land values are not a planning consideration, but clearly land values do matter. To the developer with the cost of land fixed, more units, more profit. To residents, land values are in some sense a surrogate for the quality and the amenity of the living environment, the urban environment where they live. This, we have Vincenzo's, which ups our ambience for the Bower Lofts, and there's a certain part of our land value that's associated with that existence of Vincenzo's. But the loss of privacy, again, there was mentioned before that we couldn't develop on the Bowers another little building, say 20 or 30 condominium buildings with windows east and west because of the foundation. But actually, if you go down our parking garage, you'll find out the columns under the building are smaller than the columns under the parking lot. So that's really not true. So what you're doing with approving this and saying, well, there's lots of space between the buildings, you're giving the developer on the adjacent site rights, air rights that belong to us in the Bower Lofts, and which we might or might not use to increase our deposit or fund for repairs, etc.
John, just wanted to highlight you have just under a minute left.
And again, the developer wins, the residents lose. The trend towards lower good planning, zoning, and official plan standards has increased densities that result in lower ambience for residents. Council unnecessarily, there's enough zoned land already, have priorities of density over good planning, support for LRT, fear of provincial government, and so on. This has been a trend over the last 10 or 15 years. Each time the new reality becomes normalized and expectations of developers for more and more densities and profits. Developers win, residents lose. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Thank you for that presentation, John. Appreciate it. I will look to council to see if anyone has any questions for the delegate. Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted to say that I can appreciate the concern over sunlight, and as my colleagues will know, I always ask the questions about shadow. Just from my own experience in my residence, I'm always chasing little slivers of sun, so I do appreciate that. I'm wondering if I can ask Max just to, sorry, one more question. I'd like to know from your perspective how many hours of sunlight you have in the mornings. I understand that.
Well, I'm on the north side. I
You're
have
on the
0 until 3 o'clock. In the winter time, it's, you know, maybe 4 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry?
Just on how you could accomplish more sun, I personally would see no problem with 42 stories if it was a small, tight, narrow tower on the west side of the property. So it, you know, had much more sun than now. That would assume, of course, they went to a zoning standards which are set to provide good planning of urban areas. That's how you establish zoning and official plan, is desirable outcomes. So when every time you turn around and reduce the requirements there, you're trading off density for the ambience for residents, including the 400 or 500 people who would live in this development.
Thank you. I do just wanted to then, Max, I'm wondering if you can speak to the December shadow for us, and also just to clarify, when you had the shadow study, within a 4-hour period, there is a 2-hour window. Is that correct? Do I have that correct?
Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Rowe. It's, the requirement is for, I wish I knew it off by heart, but I obviously review it as, I adhere to it through my review, and I thought you were about to say something. Through my review, there was sufficient sun access and it met the criteria in our urban design manual. The applicant did also include an assessment of the shadows in December. And as I mentioned in my presentation, I certainly review where sun is being accessed during the minimal windows of sun at that time of year. Again, a 4-story building would likely shadow the Bower Lofts at this location. If you look at the existing buildings, their shadows in December do almost reach at least halfway across the parking lot. So these pieces are certainly reviewed, and they did meet the criteria in our urban design manual.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, for the delegate from council? Seeing none, thank you, John. I do have a question from your presentation for staff, if I could. There was, you can have a seat though, that's fine, thank you, John. The broader conversation that we've heard from a number of delegates here today about temporary vehicle access and usage on adjacent streets. I mean, this is an issue regardless of the size of the building, regardless of the number of people that are in the building. Perhaps it's exacerbated as there are more and more people, I understand that. But this is also an issue that's prevalent throughout the city. Is this something that that staff have contemplated? Is this something that requires a broader sort of discussion and strategy? And I'd like to hear from planning staff what their thoughts are on this issue as we intensify the city further.
To you, Councillor Bodley. I have a couple points, but it sounds like Mr. Cotter has something as well. I did want to just note, I heard a couple of people echo that there aren't spaces being provided on site for temporary drop-off or visitor spaces. There are, in fact, spaces within the building being provided. They're meeting all the zoning requirements in that regard. There was a directive or recommended directive to investigate the current temporary parking on John Street, which is a 2-hour max, which essentially eats up however many spaces are on that block for 2 hours, which in many respects doesn't make sense. I did consult our transportation staff about opportunities to explore, a different time limit to accommodate potential drop-offs, deliveries that matter. The same situation obviously exists on Caroline, where these spaces are being occupied for 2 hours, where perhaps shorter-term delivery drop-off loading matters could be accommodated, because this is a new climate of deliveries obviously everywhere, and I believe municipalities are trying to recalibrate to address this. So those are my 2 points. I don't know if Joel wants to add.
In response to your question, Chair Bodley, certainly the issue is top of mind for the planning division. It's been an issue that we've been looking at for a while. When we adopted and brought forward the new comprehensive zoning bylaw to council, we did take certain measures from a regulatory perspective in terms of mandating requirements for minimum amounts of visitor parking, mandating loading spaces to a higher degree than existed before to try and accommodate many of these issues that are emerging and continue to emerge through the development, particularly infill and intensification projects. And through the site plan process, which is not before council, is through the detailed design work that's being done. Often when we look at opportunities to identify appropriate locations for deliveries, loading areas, as well as wayfinding signage to try and, again, guide people to logical locations. The challenge with infill and intensification sites, particularly in the core, is land is limited, right? And the more land we have, the more options we have. In tighter sites, it's more difficult, but we do ensure, and as Mr. Kerrigan said, that there's a minimum amount of visitor parking on site, as well as loading within the design of the building to ensure that deliveries and other things can be accommodated on site. And if we can improve the exterior environment, working with our transportation division and engineering group, we certainly look for opportunities to do that as well.
Thank you for that, Joel. Oh, that sparked some questions. Councillor Freeman.
It was just another question out of the delegates' presentation that I had for staff. It was with regard to setback reductions off King Street and off adjoining properties. Do we have other precedent in the uptown? Because I seem to recall having a 0 setback off of King Street for some other development applications, and like where the like some of the other applications nearby, I'm sure that we also amended setbacks. Can you help me to remember that?
Through Councillor Bodley to Councillor Freedom, that is correct. This zone is the U2 zone, the Uptown 2 zone. The Uptown 1 zone, I believe, at least in the Uptown, does permit a 0-meter setback, and that is to encourage buildings closer to the street, to encourage an urban room, and then have podium setbacks above to mimic traditional built form in the Uptown, which generally have shorter setbacks at grade. I mentioned the 5-meter setback in this location. The U2 is located, for the U2 zone, is located typically in close proximity to lower density neighborhoods, and so a larger setback is within the planning framework for these areas to accommodate sort of that transition of moving from a more dense situation to a less dense, more low-density residential. Also noted in my presentation, this part of the city is high density and more in line in some ways with the higher density U1 zone, and staff considered that through the review.
Okay. We're going to move on to our next registered delegation. Our next registered delegate is Craig Sloss. And Craig, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Craig Sloss, and I'm here today to speak to you as someone who lives near the location of the proposed building on John Street. A few years ago, I purchased a condo unit in the Circa building, a 19-story building at the corner of King and Allen, and I moved in when the building opened in 2020, and I've been living there ever since. I've been quite happy since I moved into my new home. It's a short walk to both Uptown Waterloo and Belmont Village, giving me easy access to a wide array of shops, restaurants, and other amenities. Moreover, the nearby Ion station gives me quick and efficient access to many other locations in the region, giving me access to an even broader array of amenities. I'm basically living the dream of the 15-minute city that urban planners often talk about. Like the proposed building, my building also has fewer parking spots than units. Living in a walkable area has allowed me to avoid use of a personal vehicle altogether. Had I needed to purchase a parking space, the purchase price of my home would have been significantly higher. By not having a parking space, I also pay a lower common elements fee to the condo corporation. These factors were critical in allowing me to buy my home since they moved the costs into a range that I could afford. Walkability is an important factor in making housing affordable. Owning my own home has also provided me with psychological benefits. I'll never need to worry about being rent-evicted out of my home by an unethical landlord. When moving into my new condo, I also freed up a nice one-bedroom apartment where I was paying $800 a month in rent. That unit is now available to house others. I consider myself very privileged to be able to own and live in a unit in a high-rise condo building in the heart of the city, and it is very important to me that others be given the same opportunities that I have had access to. As someone who lives in the neighborhood, I want to voice my support for building a 430-bedroom building on John Street, and I look forward to welcoming many new neighbors to the area. We need to consider this development in the context of two crises that our region is faced with: the homeless crisis and the climate crisis. We have a responsibility to continue to increase our housing supply until all residents in our region are able to find quality shelter. If we revert to the as-of-right plan, I ask you to consider how many bedrooms you'll be making unavailable to house people. We also have an obligation to increase our housing supply without contributing to urban sprawl. Building housing in parts of the city that are poorly served by transit increases car dependency, resulting in higher greenhouse gas emissions. Every bedroom we build at the John Street location is one bedroom that we avoid adding to the sprawl. Now, this is an ideal part of the city for high-density housing to be built. So I have to ask, if we're not going to build it here, where are we going to build it? Now, obviously, no development is going to be perfect. For example, in this building, I would love to see 3-bedroom units included in the building, and I would love to see affordable purpose-built rental units as well. I also understand there's some concerns about increased traffic around the Iron Horse Trail, which I think are valid. I think that the city should explore adding pedestrian crossing lights where the Iron Horse Trail crosses Park and John Streets, similar to the crossings that the city of Kitchener has installed on Union and Glasgow to help manage the increase in both vehicle and pedestrian traffic. However, on balance, I think there is significant benefit in adding 430 bedrooms to our city's housing supply and ensuring that those bedrooms are located in the core of the city rather than contributing to the sprawl. Now, I also have some concerns with the way the city goes about soliciting feedback on zoning amendment proposals, which I hope you'll consider when future applications come your way. So as it's been mentioned earlier, the city sends notices to property owners who live within 120 meters of the proposed development. Now, by proactively reaching out to nearby property owners, the city is basically putting its thumb on the scale in terms of the kind of feedback it receives.
Craig, I just want to highlight you have 1 minute left, thanks.
Yeah. This process makes it more likely that the city will be hearing from people who already own housing in the area over people who do not yet have access to housing. This results in the city receiving biased feedback that's not representative of the views of the general population. We're not hearing from the people who might want to move into this building once it's completed. One way to reduce this bias would be for the city to provide residents with the option of subscribing to a mailing list that would notify them of upcoming consultations around development applications. The city should also proactively reach out to tenants in the area, not just owners. And I'd like to also recognize that 2 days after the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we are engaged in a discussion about how to use land that is on the unceded territory of the Haldeman Tract. The city should be proactively reaching out to Indigenous groups to determine how they would like to be involved in land use discussions and back up our land acknowledgements with action. So I would encourage the city to improve its public consultation process for all zoning bylaw discussions and ensure that council is hearing from a more diverse group of viewpoints going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. I'll let you stick around there for a second in case there are any questions from council. Seeing no questions from council, thanks again, Craig. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Our next registered delegate is Damien McKyle. Damien, if you could come to the podium. Oh, sorry, Damien. Go for it. Go for it, Councilor Freeman.
Sorry, on the Engage WR site, I thought you could sign up for an RRS feed. Am I wrong? Carrie, can you help me? Because I just think that's a really good question, and I think that we can do that, so.
You can. I've just had a look at the site, and you can sign up for individual projects. We can also add the widget so that you can sign up on the main page, and then as every project gets added, we can certainly do that.
Thank you.
For general interest.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's really helpful for everyone because we're using that to upload all the supporting documentation too. So I think that's really helpful. So thank you. Sorry to interrupt the next delegate.
No, thank you for that, Councilor Freeman. I think that's really important, and that we're talking about this in a changing world of how we communicate with residents. It's really important that everyone knows all the tools that we have to our at our collective disposals. Damien, after those extra 10 steps on your Apple Watch there, for real this time. Damien, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening to the chair and to the council. My name is Damien, and I am a student at the University of Waterloo, and I'm going to be speaking in support of the staff report and in favor of the proposed development. I didn't grow up in this city. I was born and raised in the suburbs of York Region, a region in which I had very little in the sense of community. As soon as I turned 16, I got my driver's license, begged my family to use their car, and was finally able to live my life with a level of independence in which I had never thought possible before. I didn't know my neighbors. I didn't spend local, and I definitely had no sense of community. When I came to Waterloo, I came expecting much more of the same. I expected my life to consist of home, school, work, and maybe visiting the mall with friends every once in a while. Instead, I was blown away by the intense sense of community and welcome I experienced. The difference? Density. The same word which seems to invoke so much fear in so many people is exactly why I fell in love with this city. The ability to walk or take consistent and fast public transit to see a friend or to get groceries or to visit uptown and spot someone you know walking along the sidewalk is a privilege in which those who have had it their whole lives, who have experienced it for decades, often underestimate and forget. I love this city, and I'm extremely hopeful for its future. I have every intention of living my life in this city after I graduate, as do many of my student friends. That vision, though, sadly fades every year. Rents continue to skyrocket, and I begin to worry if it's even possible for me to afford to live in this city as I know it. The home prices near our city's core are simultaneously a sign of its success, with demand soaring to experience the beautiful, walkable community we've crafted, and a dangerous precedent when it comes to who will even be allowed to experience it. This council has reiterated support on several occasions for addressing this housing crisis. Yet here I stand in a council room debating whether or not we should allow 25 or 30-story mixed-use building with a daycare attached, literally steps away from an underutilized LRT station, on King Street, a 10-minute walk away from the public square in Uptown. We have a dangerously low vacancy rate of 1.2% in the city, and I'm asking the council to approve this desperately needed housing influx, so not only I and future residents can get the chance to enjoy the beauty of the city, and most importantly, its community, but so current low to middle income residents can avoid being totally priced out. What we're asking for here today is a Band-Aid solution to a systemic problem with housing production. As has been pointed out to delegates in the past, staff and council are trying their hardest to get housing built, approving thousands of units this year, I believe. Yet we know it's not enough. The housing deficit we face is not the fault of staff or council which doesn't care. It's a systemic consequences of having to come to council to build anything more than a duplex almost anywhere more than three blocks from King Street. Building as much housing as possible is a necessity in our current context. It is a necessity we take advantage of such a perfectly placed development for so much housing. But if council wants to avoid having to build 30-story buildings all along King Street, we need an alternative. The Housing Affordability Task Force recommended by right housing up to 4 stories on every single residential lot. This recommendation was made to apply to all municipalities in Ontario, but in a city as innovative and progressive as Waterloo, I ask we lead the way to more. I ask that the city consider 8-story by right housing across the city, and maybe, just maybe, we can settle in the middle for 6. I was very excited to see the results of this election, last municipal election. Waterloo was very clear in what it wanted, electing a city council with a vision for the future and a passion for addressing these problems. I'm asking that council approve this amendment to help stop the affordability bleed, then take the steps to relieve the burden on staff, the King Street corridor, and yourselves by giving our community the space to help heal from this housing deficit. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Damien. Before I open it up for questions, I want to note that I and many of us around the council chambers here were just like you, students that came to the city of Waterloo from other places, not knowing what to expect. And I suspect that there are hundreds of other students like you who are passionate about the community, who want to stay here afterwards, who love the city of Waterloo as much as anybody else who lives here. But I just wanted to note that there's only one of you that have decided to come here today, and who are as engaged in our community as you are, Damien. So I just want to take the time to say thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And for all that you do for the community, and you are always welcome in the city of Waterloo.
Thank you.
I would like to look to council to see if there are any questions for the delegate here today. No questions for you, Damien. You're off the hook.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. And we are reaching the end of our registered delegates. Our final registered delegate today is Shiva Subramanian. And if you could come to the podium, you also have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Good evening, councillors. I'm honored to join you as we continue the urgent work of tackling the housing crisis in our city. I'm here again after a mere 2 weeks. That indicates to me the city is working and we are moving in the right direction, but still at a very slow pace. I urge the council to adhere to the recommendation of staff and approve this building. But we need to go further, faster. We need bold, proactive action. Waterloo has always been a city of innovation, of firsts. We made history electing the most women leading us in office. We were celebrated nationally. Unfortunately, we also made the national news due to the lack of affordable housing. Every day I see videos comparing the prices of castles in Europe to average homes in our region. Castles, literal castles. Our homes cost more than that. This crisis is robbing our people of their dignity. So how did we get here? I can tell you it's not because of immigration. It's not because of growth. It is because of the restrictive zoning laws that are designed to protect the privileged. We must remember that restrictive zoning laws originated to segregate and further marginalize, racialize people and people with lesser means. With single-family zoning, we are sending the message that if you cannot afford to buy yourself a front yard or a backyard, you're not welcome in the neighborhood. By mandating parking minimums, we send a message that if you don't own the car, you are not welcome here. Traffic congestion and parking minimums are the two sides of the same coin. Parking minimums increase the cost of units, as Craig mentioned. Building more parking spots signals to people that they must own a car. More cars cost more traffic, and it's a vicious cycle that keeps on continuing. Zoning today is being weaponized to deny people housing that was needed 5 years ago. Federal Housing Minister Sean Fraser understands this. He called out Calgary, London, and Halifax for having outdated exclusionary zoning practices and required those cities to reform zoning in order to access the Housing Accelerator Fund. When will Waterloo do the same? We are leaders, we are innovators, but here we are lagging. Let us show the rest of the country how it is done. Should we sit and wait for federal or provincial intervention, or do we lead the future? We need more multiplexes and rentals for students near universities. Minister Fraser wants 4 plexes as of right, as Damien mentioned. He wants 8. I would love 8 too, but I would also settle for 6, like he mentioned. Why don't we entirely eliminate minimum parking requirements around uptown and our universities? I don't own a car. I know a lot of students who don't own a car. A parking space just increases the burden, increases the amount that they need to pay for rent. Let's set an example for Canada. Some claim anything other than homes with white picket fences will ruin the neighborhood character. But what about the character of our people? The dream of home ownership is receding for many younger Canadians. Residents are crammed into tiny spaces, or young adults never being able to move out and form a new family because they're getting priced out. Is this the character that we want to preserve? We talk a lot about community. Community starts with ensuring everyone has an affordable home to live with dignity. Some may not like it, but growth has been coming and will continue to come to the region of Waterloo and to the city of Waterloo. We can reject it and watch homes become elitist enclaves, or we can choose to manage it responsibly. Responsible growth means abundant housing supply near transit, unlocking density and reducing car dependency, eliminating anti-youth zoning practices. True leadership means making bold choices to solve the crisis that overwhelms us today. Respected Council, the time for half measures has passed. We cannot be debating every single building. On behalf of the younger generation I represent, I ask you, open up our zoning, fund affordable housing initiatives. Do not wait for years to hand out building permits. The future of Waterloo depends on the choices that we make today. We must choose progress by eliminating barriers to increase housing supply to give every resident an affordable place to call home. Our legacy should be that Waterloo met this challenge with compassion and courage, building abundant and inclusive housing for generations to come when the housing crisis was at its peak. The youth are watching, so let's lead the way. The future starts today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva. I appreciate your commentary about the affordable housing crisis, which I don't think we're going to resolve entirely today, but it's definitely top of mind for all of council, something that we are as passionate about as you are and are eager to move the needle on. I will look to council to see if there are any questions for Shiva. Seeing none, thank you, Shiva. Appreciate your time here today.
Thank you.
And mercifully, we have reached the end of our registered delegates, but there is time to still speak. If you would like to speak to this application, is there anyone present tonight who wishes to speak to this? If you'd like, come to the podium. Mr. Mounsey has his hand up. And you have 5 minutes, and if you could state your name and your residence and municipality, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Chair, members of council, mayor, staff. My name's Ryan Mounsey. I rarely come out to speak publicly. I'm doing this because this is my home. I'm doing this because this is a landmark decision. And as Richard Florida says, who is your city? We are running out of land. And I just say in terms of the numbers game, we have 16,000 people to put here by 2031. My 12-year-old and 13-year-old ask, where am I going to live? With 1.2% vacancy, the issue is we need more housing. So where do you put it? And so I could come out tonight, this wasn't my intention to speak, as you can tell by my t-shirt, is that I'm coming out to honestly say, how do we grow and who is your city? To reach a milestone, the Nodes and Quarters study was done, and there's experts here, and the history's all here, the legacy's here, was done in 2003. That's 20 years ago. We have changed a lot over 20 years. So I come back, tonight was my night to take photos of Uptown Waterloo with the Lumen and to look around the downtown and uptown and really check out and to celebrate what we have as a city. This is a landmark proposal, and that's the only reason why I'm here tonight, is that you're talking about something of such scale and magnitude that will make a difference about, say, who is your city? I had a whole bunch of other things as I was writing down, just listening in here, and I'm not even going to cover those. The issue simply is, who is your city? We're running out of land. We have a growing community. We need talent, and we need housing. And so zoning bylaws are meant to regulate projects. Tell me the last time a project conformed and complied in the downtown. They don't. And so I come out here forcefully, in a kind way, to say it's time that we truly grow up. We're in the next evolution of Uptown Waterloo. We have a $1 billion LRT system here to move people. Let it do its job. That's it. I had other points to cover. I thank you. I'll stay here for a second, but I expect no questions back. And that's it.
Thank you, Ryan. I love the t-shirt, and I'm hoping you'll share some of those pictures at the end of the day when you take them uptown. Does anybody want to surprise Ryan and ask him a question? No luck today, Ryan. Thank you, though, for your presentation and your impassioned commentary. I will look again to see if there is anyone else present tonight who would like to speak to the application that is before us. And seeing nobody, if there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. I will look to council to see if there are any additional questions, if anybody would like to make any comments or put forward a motion.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just had one additional question.
Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Through your chair, Bodley. I was just curious about the amount of parking that's, I know it's already been reduced, and the daycare center that's there. Is there a, additional work that could be done on that, like the daycare, because we have such a need for daycare in our city? Is it possible that the daycare could be expanded and parking reduced even further? What would that look like?
Through Councillor Bodley to the Mayor. They have not, the current parking proposed is not reduced. It's meeting actually the required parking regulation. There's no proposal to amend that regulation. So the question as to whether we could reduce it further, this is the first that's being tabled. So are you requesting whether or not that could be a consideration, whether we should contemplate reducing it?
Yes, I mean, really, sorry, I must have misunderstood the report. I thought it had already been reduced once. Maybe, but if it hasn't been reduced, that's okay. Is it possible to reduce it and to increase the size of the daycare? Does that, like, do those trade off in any way that would be?
Oh, I think, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, so the parking was in fact higher in the first submission. In an effort to reduce the scale of the podium, the parking number was reduced down to meet, as it previously exceeded the required number. Now, in terms of the square footage of the daycare, I'd have to double check because it is the square footage of the commercial units that determines the number of parking spaces required. So there could be an opportunity to increase the size of that without requiring additional parking. I'd have to take that back and look at it, but this could be something that perhaps we could consider through site plan. That's something I can't give you a precise answer on tonight.
Are there any other questions from council, or do I have somebody who is willing to put a motion forward?
I don't have the script in front of me. Do you have the script? Official Plan Amendment number 39, zoning bylaw amendment Z 2211, 203 to 207 King Street South and 10 to 16 John Street West, 2865 161 Ontario Incorporated. Whereas council has considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and whereas council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff, therefore be it resolved that council approve report IPPW 2023-046, that council adopt official plan amendment number 39, OPA 39, as set out in section 8 of IPPW 2023-046, The council requests that the regional municipality of Waterloo approve official plan amendment number 39, OPA 39, and that council approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 2211, 203-207 King Street South and 1016 John Street West in accordance with section 8 of IPPW 2023-46.
Thank you for that, Councillor Freeman. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Wright is seconding that motion. Is there any further discussion or comments? Yeah, Councillor Freeman, please go ahead.
If you don't mind, did you want to go first?
No, I think
Okay.
this is
Okay.
how we get the comments.
Okay, so going back to October 3rd of 2022, which was when this application first came to council, the notes that I had based on the information that I had received, in particular, one of the concerns was around traffic, and I was certainly concerned about traffic. And so, as was identified by the applicant, a traffic study was not requested by the region because this is intended to be a transit-orientated development. But the applicant did undertake a traffic study because I was quite concerned about whether or not, similar to the residents, this notion that the streets were designed primarily to serve single residential dwellings, and you know what happens, what are the level of service that happens on these streets. I think we've heard more on that tonight in terms of deliveries and so on. I think being purposeful in terms of how we manage that, and I would like to, you know, speak to staff and say, can you please take that back to site plan and give some thoughtful consideration to how loading is managed. And more broadly, I think we heard that loading is not being managed well with the existing structures, so maybe we need to go back to transportation to say, how do we better manage loading and deliveries around the current structures that are there, because it sounds like it's a pervasive problem. So I appreciate the fact that the traffic study was done. When I reviewed it, I only saw one level of service that was an E. I didn't see any that failed at the intersection, so for me, that was a big piece. Like Councillor Rowe, I do worry a lot about shadow studies, so when I went through the architectural plans, I looked at them from the lens, if this building was not here, how would the shadow studies function? And the buildings that are approved on John Street on the south side, along with the current Manulife Tower, the shadows from those buildings are already there. And so this building, in my view of the architectural plans, did not create a new test as it related to shadows from this podium and this tower. So, because I was worried about that too, and I appreciate that. The other piece I wanted to think about over this past year was with regard to the setbacks. The setbacks were a concern for me, but I think, you know, the question that was answered by Max as it relates to other developments, and you're right, at one point in time, this might have been a transitional development, but now that there's two towers south of this, it doesn't really feel like a transitional development anymore from a height and density perspective. And I appreciate the fact that Mr. Mounsey has spent many of an hour around a council table in the region and also has a clear understanding of how we've modified zoning. So that was helpful to be reminded of. I was appreciative that the applicant, I believe you also did a heritage assessment after, which was requested after the last meeting a year ago. So I had certainly gone through that as well. I agree with the mayor. It would be nice if this childcare center could be larger than 2,400 square feet. And the other piece, you know, the density is something that I think we do have to come to terms with as a council, and we have been very bold in terms of saying how important it is to build more housing, and this is our opportunity to demonstrate that commitment. And so I'm willing to support this density, and I really did appreciate the delegations that spoke in favor of this application, And you really, like, I know that my son, who's a similar age to some of you, has his evaluation is that he'll never be able to afford to own his own place. And so, you know, hearing from you and saying, like, this offers an opportunity for me, or a potential opportunity for me, is valued, and I appreciate that. And so for all of those reasons, I will support the motion.
Thank you for that, Councillor Freeman, and thank you for bringing us back to the informal meeting, which is one of the first things that I do as well too when we come to a formal meeting, is reviewing some of the discussion from the original meeting and what were some of the takeaways. And if I may layer in on top of that, one of the other discussions around the informal meeting was about increasing the number of two and hopefully 3-bedroom units. Now, we didn't get maybe all the way there, but we certainly have seen a significant increase in the number of 2-bedroom units, so I will highlight that as well too from my notes from the previous meeting. Is there anybody else who would like to speak, Councillor Wright?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I think Mr. Mousy actually stole my words. I always talk about nothing conforming in Uptown. And that's one of the reasons why we currently have 30 kilometers on residential streets, because we don't have boulevards. You know, we have curb-facing sidewalks. This is the struggle with our setback allowance along this particular development. So everything is a challenge in this infill development, and there's lots of things that really concern me about this development. But for me, the thing that trumps everything is this crisis that we're in. And I cannot, with good conscience, move forward with denying an application like this that is so close to conforming. And I know that we're setting precedent to some degree on the height bonusing, and that's a hard one for me to swallow for sure, because I don't think we should be in the business of precedent setting on these sorts of developments, but it's a trade-off that I believe we have to make in this particular case when there are so few opportunities to create this density. That's where I stand.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wright. Anybody else on council? Okay, given that we've got a motion, mover and a seconder, I'm going to now call the vote of council. All those in favor? All those opposed? That carries. Thank you. Moving on in our agenda this evening, consideration of notice of motion given at previous meeting, we have none. Notice of motion, we have none. Communications and correspondence, we have none. Unfinished business, we have none. Questions? Council, are there any questions of staff this evening? Seeing none. New business. Does anybody have any new business that they would like to bring forward? Mayor McCabe, go for it.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just wanted to thank everyone who came to the Mayor's Oktoberfest Market yesterday. The BAA primarily organized that, and there was 65 or 70 vendors who participated, and it was a really great community event. And it was a really good opportunity to bring some polka to the Uptown. You can never get enough of that. And I had the opportunity to have a chicken dance with Councillor Roach, so that was a first for us. But anyway, I just want to thank the people who put it together, including staff in our office, who as well as Create Waterloo and the BIA. So thank you very much for that.
Councillor Rowe.
I just wanted to mention the Indigenous mural unveiling at Wilfrid Laurier on Thursday, I believe. It was really quite an incredible event, and representation matters and visibility matters. And I think that mural in our city on such a busy street is a daily reminder of reconciliation and our steps forward. So it was really fantastic. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Rowe. Councillor Freeman?
Lumen. Honestly, like, it was amazing, and I just hope that all the commissioners here can take back to all of your teams, because I know that at the information center at Waterloo Park, it was a wonderful, happy woman who also works in our Public Works Department who was there, and she ran our open house at the Public Works building, and she was volunteering, so I know that proved to me that we had all hands on deck for Lumen, and it was amazing. I don't know how many people we had in Uptown, but it blew my mind. And my niece and my great nieces and nephews who had spent all day at the Toronto Zoo, and they're like 5 years old, they slept in the car on the way home from the zoo so they could do something special in Uptown Waterloo that night. And Lumen did not disappoint. It was amazing. And the smiles, that was my big takeaway. Every time I saw people, they were on the teeter-totters, and they were smiling and laughing. They were in the circles in the square, and they were smiling and laughing. They were meeting friends and neighbors. They were, just walking down the street, waiting for the signals, waiting in line to dance and be seen on the side of the clay and glass gallery. And the kayaks, watching the colors change on the paddles, it was very magical the whole night, and I just really can't thank staff enough for really pulling that off with such incredible grace and professionalism.
I will echo that on behalf of the rest of council as well too. It was a beautiful night, and I'll note that I don't know how many people there were uptown this year versus last year, and I'm sure we'll get some updates on that. But I'm sure it was more. And I think one of the things that that speaks to the sort of momentum behind Lumen is the word of mouth. People who went to it last year and who are telling people to go to it this year. And I think we're just going to see it grow and grow over time. And I'll note and tie into something else. We had the official opening of the new sort of Silver Lake at Waterloo Park also since our last council meeting. And the way that Lumen was activated with the upgrades at Waterloo Park and the lights that are already existing there and the fountain, et cetera, it's just beautiful, and it really speaks to the incredible work that staff did in that enormous project. So thank you again to staff for that, and onward to Lumen 2024. Any other new business? Sorry, I lost my place. Seeing none.
Can I just make one more?
I said seeing none already.
No, I was like this. I was like this.
Okay,
I was
fine.
like this.
Okay.
I mean, echo everything you said about Lumen, but I also just, thinking of the Truth and Reconciliation Day, just wanted to share that one of the activities I was really privileged to take part in last week, with my mayor's position, I sit on UW's Board of Governors, and they had a board retreat on Wednesday. And one of the activities that took up the morning was a blanket exercise with their elder that works with the University of Waterloo, and it was the most impactful thing that I've done over the past 2 or 3 years with respect to my learning and unlearning about First Nations, it's the best history lesson that I've ever had about colonization and residential schools, and it was led by First Nations facilitators, and afterwards everyone who was there from the board did a quick debrief, and it was really emotional and meaningful and moving to just hear how it affected everyone who had participated in that. So I did share that with Brian Hill, our Indigenous advisor, and Sanjay as well, and I hope that that's something that we can bring back to our leadership team, and maybe through staff at various exercises, staff meetings, et cetera, throughout the city, and perhaps maybe even do something like that for our community, maybe using some of our public spaces. But just wanted to share that in light of the Truth and Reconciliation Day from Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you for ignoring my seeing none and sharing that story. No, that was really, I really appreciate that, and the opportunities that council has to learn, and you as the mayor have to learn what we need to do from a truth and reconciliation perspective is extremely important, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. It helps with all of our learning. But seeing no more further new business, I will move on to the enactment of bylaws that I am disappointingly not going to be able to move. So who would like to enact the bylaws today? Councillor Freeman is extremely excited, and Councillor Hanmer less so, but also excited. Sorry, all those in favor of the bylaws? That is unanimous. Looking for somebody to motion to adjourn. Councillor Rowe, Councillor Roach, all those in favor? That is everybody. Thank you for the meeting today.